And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room tonight. Of course, tonight I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia's scary monsters, super creeps, keep me running scared.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen more of the CIA invasion of the UFO file. It's actually getting really wild at this stage. Leading up to these Luna hearings that are supposed to open up so many classified documents in relation to President Kennedy's assassination, Robert Kennedy's assassination, the MLK assassination, and then finally the UFO file. The problem is that all of the CIA people have hijacked the UFO file part, and so that's coming at the end of May, those hearings. But in the meantime, they're doing a follow-up to the JFK hearings. And I often stress that these are very, very pivotal pieces, very, very important pieces. And you want the right people in there asking the right questions, not, political ne'er-do-wells in there making podcast points for the clickbait action. So we've had a lot of problems with those hearings. And we know that the first Luna one was a bust. I'm going to tell you how this whole process is being hijacked, but there is a way to shake it out. And we're going to get deep into that tonight. And tonight brings us to a very, very unusual piece, which is all about Brother Sunburst, who is Norman Paulson, and a very interesting character, kind of a new age guru from the 70s and 80s, but he actually goes all the way back to the 1950s and Yogananda and Van Tassel, and all sorts of interesting meeting of this kind of Eastern mystery school with the UFO file. I'm going to show how Paulson is this is an additional piece of this, of how he was entrusted with something very, very important, a device, and how this gained him an incredible advantage financially and otherwise that he squandered. And then it set off this incredible rush to find this Melchisedec device, which is the UFO neutralizer, the UFO killer device, first referenced in the meeting of Nikola Tesla and John G. Trump. We're going to get deep into this tonight and also show the intersection of someone who is not discussed enough when it comes to examining the UFO file, free energy, and the deeper pieces of the government corporations controlling this aspect, which is Bruce De Palma, who is the late Bruce De Palma and the brother of the famous director Brian De Palma. I'm going to tell you something very interesting about him tonight, and it's a good time to reflect on his incredible awareness and the incredible lens, magnifying glass that he brought into this entire field that was covered over, glossed over with his death, very premature death in his, I think at the age of 51. So he's going to open our eyes into how all this rolls. But guess what? He was very close and working with Norman Paulson, Brother Sunburst, and they were working on his free energy device. Well, apparently Paulson, who again had the ranch next door to President Reagan, SDI, Star Wars President Reagan, it's kind of a privileged position since Reagan was governor and then president. You have to get a lot of clearances from that, but a lot of celebrities were seen over there as well, including John Travolta on a regular basis, which I find kind of interesting. But I'm going to show you how, more than just being kind of a scandal sheet or the analysis of a hippie cult gone wrong, that there's something very, very interesting about the technology people involved, and how I've actually been fortunate enough to hear from at least one of them, and how this could change the entire story of the hunt for that Melchisedec device, and also include some very unusual figures like Curtis LeMay in all this, who in 1973 opened up to a fellow person in the deep state who was a scientist. And of course, LeMay was part of the Joint Chiefs and a real firebrand enemy of Kennedy's, and goes all the way back to the firebombing of Japan back in 1945. But LeMay also had some interesting friends and kept in the company of scientist T.T. Brown for regular basis. But in this case, he was talking to another scientist, and he said, We need to find the Melchisedec device. 1973. They did not have it. They lost it as of the fumbling around in Tesla's papers in 1943. At least they were looking for it there. There's 30 years in between where they don't have it. That's very significant if we get deep into what that technology was all about, what the device was all about, and how could you hide something like that? Well, I'm going to show you, they've been talking a lot about declassifying FBI records. There are some FBI records concerning the UFO file that would be particularly important and interesting, which is all about the hunt for this Melchisedec device, which apparently could take down UFOs at a distance. That was its main property. So we're going to get into that tonight. And I'm also going to show how the selective referencing of the CIA files that they were able to dish out. By the way, they never gave up the Joannidis file. They still hung on to that one. Big surprise. They let out a fitness report of his from 1966, but Joannidis was the top psychological warfare officer who set up the Oswald Project. It's well known that he was involved deeply with obfuscating all the Kennedy investigations that ran through the 60s to the 80s. He was the point man on the inside. And then finally, of course, his association with Bobby Inman. There's that interface again between the JFK assassination and the UFO file. All of this deep tonight with a little help from Tulsi Gabbard. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is Dark Journalist episode X-Series episode 196, and it is Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file and Nikola Tesla right in the heart of the action with this, including a very unusual high-level meeting between the Doomsday COG planners and President Trump, who wasn't president at the time. Guess what the date of this meeting was?
Do tell.
1987. Isn't it interesting? Well, it's a very obscure little thing that went on there where there was someone who was writing at the time, Slate magazine, and was amused at the idea that Reagan was considering Trump's advice seriously and decided offhandedly to go and interview Trump about this. And it comports with comments that Trump just recently made about having weapons which no one in the world knows about that can do unbelievable things. Well, the hints around this are getting hardcore. Of course, the leader of the Space Force just came out and made similar comments and said, we can go anywhere on Earth in an hour. Well, where's that technology? So they're starting to let it out, and they're starting this kind of aggressive thing by saying, don't mess with us, we have this. And I think they're hoping to get a response like on the side of the Russians saying, somebody like Putin coming out and saying, oh yeah, well, we have it too. But there's always been this back and forth in the background, which suggests I've got this really hardcore piece. Now, you wouldn't want to let that out, but you might suggest it enough. And in the case of Trump, I think he just can't resist. So he's talked before about Project Invisibility as far as the F-35 and other things are concerned, and they've always had to walk back those comments. There's a few interesting comments coming out of the Trump White House we're going to get into tonight, and he's coming up to his first 100 days in office. By May 1st, it'll be there. That's really how you can rank it. But obviously, the tariffs, Doge, a lot of the moves around, strengthening the border and some of the things that he's done. There's a whole realignment going on that we can map out in his first 100 days. And, you see all kinds of opinions about this. And the way that I look at it is you have to give them time to initiate their agenda to see exactly what it's all about. So there's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions, And but right now you have a fantastic cabinet in there with Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, RFK Jr. And I think that there's room for saying that these people are going to fundamentally change the way that things work in Washington. However, they're floating above a very interesting stream, which is the deep state that has controlled the process there for so long. And then also what components of the deep state are they intertwined with. So we're going to get into all that tonight, but I think it's a very important place that we're at. And on the media side, you see the hysteria from the corporate media. Just everything that the current administration does is, fascist and all the rest of it. And then the conservative media has a lot of problems, and the independent media has a lot of problems. And I think we're going to end up looking at something that needs to happen, which is a totally different kind of media that runs right down the middle, outside of the corporate media and outside of the paid independent media. Something else that could work there, because I think the podcast thing has been co-opted too dramatically. I actually think a lot of the same forces that were making money on CNN and MSNBC are now piggybacking behind some of these other things on the conservative side to make money and control how they roll things out. So I'm going to get into that tonight. This is an explosive episode for a lot of different reasons, and I'm going to start it off with some very interesting comments by the DNI Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay.
Very interesting. Before I go any further, I should mention that we're going to take your questions in the second half of tonight's program, and we'll go a couple hours with you tonight. In the second half, Miss Olivia will be putting those questions together. You can ask them at any time during the show here tonight, and try to keep it show related as much as possible, theme related. And what do you got out there?
LISZT Barrett says, a hot mess, a warm bath, warm brandy, and dark journalist. And Free Wheezy said, I started watching this show right after the last Brother Sunburst episode, went back to watch it, and it answered so many questions. Excited for this one.
Yeah, I guess you could almost call this a part 3, because you have the Melchisedec device, the advice from Melchisedec, and Melchisedec device episode, and Brother Sunburst comes out of that. So that was part 2. And then all of this stuff hit about the election and everything else. But I kept all the information and kept digging in. I think for about 3 years, I've been looking at De Palma, who's a very fascinating character, has a lot of respect in the circles where, there's a lot of ethical guardrails on the free energy movement, and those circles that really have that integrity. These people really respect what he was up to. But he worked for the whole decade between 1972 and 1982 with Brother Sunburst. And he brought in the free energy device there, and Sunburst had the Melchisedec device. There's something very interesting going on in that interface. And I think a look at De Palma's history gives us a real snapshot. We're going to get into that tonight. I also want to mention, especially if you're new here, a quick reminder to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the incredible censorship that we go through on this channel for bringing these things forward. And, I have mentioned this, but News Nation's coming out with this big expose that's going to be all about Kennedy and the UFO file, as if this is new information. We've put out like 5 documentaries outlining this in detail. And they've jacked it up with all the same players, but they're going to be touting X series points. So it's very important to kind of preempt that process before it hits. And I'm going to cover that as well tonight, because I think it's important before they roll this out. They already have Russ Coldhart out there. I'm scared, Russ. And he is out there just doing this whole trip like, this could be, could we find out that JFK and the UFO file? Well, what they're doing is they're kind of, on one hand, they're trying to shut certain things down in terms of narratives that the public can get their hands on, but the things they can't shut down, they're co-opting. So it's very important to catch the CIA co-opt and go for the real thing, the potent story, which we've laid out here on this program. And that also goes for the John Trump Tesla story, which I also see some pirating aspects, trying to move it into something totally different. And in the case of the Kennedy material, I think they're trying to co-opt it right now, and they're using this whole thing, the Peter Thiel players, the CIA people, and the whole bit. Those are the same people that have moved into the UFO hearings, unfortunately, that are coming up. I'm glad they're doing the hearings, but the whole process has been pirated, and I think there are some ways to correct, to steady the ship on that. But there was a great deal of promise in them. What's interesting is, if you go back to basically like a year ago Christmas, I sent a letter to the House Speaker, Johnson, all about how because he mentioned about being serious about the JFK thing and how they could have church committee style hearings. And I said, if you're going to do it, you have to include the UFO file. Here's why. Bing, 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 bing. Had that hand delivered to them there in Congress, and I also put it out publicly. So they had this great promise about church committee style hearings and all the rest of it. And what we get are these Luna committees. And I actually think the Congresswoman Luna is trying to, and I think she's thwarted by not having the right people advising her on it, and not getting the right questions and not having the right experts in there, the whole bit. So and really getting bad advice, but also I feel like that process is being pirated by the very same intel forces that didn't want to release the records in the first place. So it's very important to get this process right. There's only a small window because these hearings all end come the end of August. So there's not going to be any more. So while you have that window going on here, rolling through April to August, it has to work. You have to make it happen to get that stuff across. And so I have some very good ideas about that. Here's an interesting thing that shows a big fissure in relation to this, and why I think all of the Trump officials suffer from a Stansfield-Turner problem. And Stansfield-Turner, famously the CIA director who was powerless on the Jimmy Carter administration after they fired Bush, because none of the CIA people wanted to deal with him. He was just an outsider. And I think there's a lot of that going on. FBI, Homeland Security, and at the Central Intelligence Agency and the NGA and other places, I think they're stonewalling a lot of this. Now, some interesting comments came up, Tulsi Gabbard, when she said that she had, in her own efforts, discovered JFK assassination records that had not been brought forward by the CIA, and that she had people going through them that were working in steady shifts, going through this stuff that had never been digitized and were in boxes and warehouses and things of this nature. It was very unusual because they already have a process underway and all the rest of it. But she stepped in and she mentioned that there's going to be a lot more coming out in the next few days. That's pretty quick. Then she mentioned on top of that, quote, there are 100 people working around the clock on RFK, MLK assassination files. Now, the Robert Kennedy case lines up also with the UFO file through the figure of Thane Eugene Caesar, who was working at Skunk Works at the time, as we put in our documentary that was all about X-Protect, the UFO file assassins, a whole section around that. And that documentary now that was 2020. It's amazing how time flies on this stuff. But all that information's in there. So what she had to say was 100 people working around the clock on the RFK, MLK assassination files. DNI, Tulsi Gabbard said Thursday, she has a large team working overtime to archive government documents and release them related to the 1968 assassinations. And so now she has stepped into the role, which tells me that the kind of penetration that Luna and her committee were trying to get in terms of the records and everything else, they got records out of the CIA, but the CIA was able to sidestep around the really crucial aspects. One of the things I think they should bring up, and this is more of my free advice to the Luna Committee, is all of the activities, records, and whereabouts of E. Howard Hunt, who figures so prominently in the confession stage from the CIA at the end of his life, saying the CIA was involved, LBJ, was involved with the CIA and putting that together on the record, but in private, as I've mentioned, and we've demonstrated on this program through Watergate lawyer Douglas Caddy, telling him JFK was assassinated over the UFO file. That whole piece needs to be investigated, and records relating to that, and how that, how did he end up at Melon in 1969 anyway? What was he doing just previous to that? And, how did they kind of semi-retire him to go off and then form the Plumbers for President Nixon? Very strange on a number of levels, and those records are crucial and need to come out. Now, this is interesting, and I'm going to show how this dovetails with what we're talking about, because y'all might remember Edgar Mitchell, who was one of the most important astronauts in the space program. And once he was done with his NASA duties, he started the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which was all about meditation and these other things. But little do we know that the whole thing about Sunburst reaches over to Mitchell as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Sunburst, now Mitchell, through the figure of Bruce De Palma, this whole thing is coming to bear. So let's open a little bit with this. Have astronauts come across UFOs in space? Wife of former astronaut claims they did. This is from late March. And of course, that is Edgar Mitchell's widow, who wrote a book about her life as an astronaut's wife. Very interesting book. And she says, late NASA pilot Edgar Mitchell believed that something was out there. His wife says that many astronauts told her they saw strange things during their space missions. Now, we know this, and it's been leaked out through a number of different channels, but fundamentally, the thing that has been blocked from these people is as soon as they came back, they got really, really heavy advice about what to say. And this is part of the problem of the secrecy around the space program, and also why we have things like, we didn't go to the moon type things floating around out there, because the regular story, the way they tell it, doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. There's a lot of obfuscation around the technology, and they're having a heck of a time 52 years later getting back, let's face it. And by the way, what do you do for 52 years if you're running a program and you just say, hey, let's stop it for 52 years and pick it back up?
They got away with it.
I think when the thing goes black, it's sort of obvious to anyone who's looking, but most people are just like, oh, I guess they're not doing anything. They're not talking about it. No, they're doing something. Okay. Talking to Daily Mail, Anita Mitchell, the wife of NASA pilot Edgar Mitchell, said that many of the pilots and astronauts had seen something, and so he also felt that something was out there. Edgar was the sixth man to walk on the moon in 1971 and was part of the Apollo 14 crew. She claimed that these sightings happened during America's early space missions. Apollo astronaut James McDivitt was reportedly one of the many who saw UFOs in space, according to Anita. It was not only in space, but some of them also reported seeing strange craft while flying conventional planes on Earth. So they're getting UFO sightings in space, on Earth, just everywhere that don't add up. Astronauts claim to have seen something. Recalling a party where Project Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper was with them, Anita said, I remember Gordy telling us that he had seen something. The astronaut added that what he had seen was extremely fast and that they had nothing that goes that fast and goes that high out of NASA. Cooper was one of the most experienced NASA pilots, but Anita claims that he admitted that despite seeing the UFOs, American pilots could never catch them. Anita has released the book, You Don't Look Like an Astronaut's Wife, in which she has revealed that her husband, who died in 2016, had asked the U.S. government to release information about the strange sightings to the public since they might be linked to aliens. Now, Edgar had on several occasions requested the government to do so. In 2009, Mitchell went public with his demand and called on the government to release information about UFOs he thought it was hiding. He was one of the believers in extraterrestrial life. Do you really think we're the only intelligence in the universe, she said? Because if we are, the universe is in trouble. Meantime, Anita says being an astronaut's wife was like being in a different universe. Now, this is so interesting because on one hand, you have a major advocate there for disclosure. But when we get into Bruce De Palma's story, we're going to find there's pressure being exerted upon Mitchell to try to control the actions of De Palma, and that pressure is coming from the CIA. And Mitchell is relaying some very threatening comments directly from the CIA to De Palma in terms of his work around UFOs and his work around free energy. So this is interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. There's this guy out there who for years has tried to get people to swear on the Bible who claim to have, been on the moon, these different astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and the rest of it. And he'll run around with a Bible and say, hi, you guys are great. By the way, can you just swear on this Bible that you went to the moon? And they always freak out and run away from him. I can appreciate it, if you were somebody who went to the moon and, you have this distinguished career and this guy's running around after you with a Bible, that could get pretty annoying and you might want to get rid of him. At the same time, there's a sort of a particular hostility for him that I find interesting because, of course, it should be easy to say, sure, I'll swear on a Bible about it because, of course, I was there. So, you can kind of see both sides, but it's weird. So anyway, this guy makes this kind of expose documentary where he's hanging out with Mitchell and his son. And Mitchell invites him to his house and says, come on. And he's got a secret camera thing going on. And he starts talking. And in the middle of this, casual conversation at Mitchell's home, he whips out that Bible and says, do you swear the whole truth and nothing but the truth that you went to the moon? And they figure it out. They're like, oh my God, you're that guy. Get out of here. But what I find interesting, if you watch that video, and it's been circulated, I think they made this thing around 2013, 2012, somewhere in there. But if you watch that, it's very interesting because Mitchell threatens him that the CIA will grab him, abduct him, and interrogate him. And Mitchell could have just been pissed off and, feeling betrayed, wanted to really freak this guy out. But it's weird in the light of what De Palma says. So there's some crisscross with the CIA and Mitchell that I think we can explore just in terms of who are they relaying information through. And once you go into that program and you're sworn to such secrecy, who actually controls your actions when you come back? So, when Buzz Aldrin, if you read his books, there's a lot of reading between the lines about things that he saw that he can't talk about. And then you have to wonder who's holding that kind of sort of Damocles over his head. It becomes interesting if you start to connect these dots. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to connect dots that run across centuries. So we're going to go late 19th century into the 1950s, into the Reagan era, into the Trump era. So, these dots, by the time we're done here tonight, a lot of things are going to be clear. And it's going to be quite a roller coaster ride. I promise you that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X-Series 196, going deep tonight into Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. Both of them figure very, very prominently here tonight. And of course, the strange figure of Sunburst as the intermediary for this high technology is something I raised, and it was interesting because the more I looked into it and was connecting dots, I had a hunch with certain things. And then strangely enough, those things started to open up. And then it just became this undeniable pattern. And then finally, a few people from the ranch reached out to me, and some of them had the Sunburst Ranch, where they ran basically the first kind of Whole Foods. And they were really ahead of the curve there. But there are also stories, if you go in the late 1970s, about Brother Sunburst, that he's amassed this incredible fortune in the millions that just does not add up. Because I happen to know his bio very well, and only in 1968 was he completely poor as a house painter. So how do you get, by the time you're into 1978, you've amassed all these millions from having organic oranges? I don't know, but certainly he was ahead of the trend. But it makes more sense to me that he, somewhere in that process, came into somebody saying, can you hide this on your ranch? And the whole idea that his great expanse financially and his great expanse business-wise and connections and all the rest of it came from him developing and hiding an advanced technology. Now, the part that we can prove on the surface is all about Bruce De Palma and the N-Force, the famous N-machine being developed there just for Sunburst, and all the interesting stories related to that. The Melchisedec device, however, the pattern of that and how it lands at Sunburst, I think we laid out very well in the first episode, but we're going to show tonight how those two things come together. And that's what we're going to really be on a different level of looking at this, because I think it's crucial to understand how the government hunt for that technology was one incredibly focused effort, and that you would need some kind of intermediary, some, sort of place to hide this. And it would have to be in something that wouldn't be associated with the government in any way or anything they could track. So in fact, sticking it in a hillside on a farmhouse that does organic vegetables makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to show how Sunburst had the background that they were able to do this with. And that's Norman Paulson. We're getting deep into him tonight. And the more, this is the third episode where we brought up Paulson, the more we dig into him, the more we find. And it's becoming undeniable. Very fascinating guy and fascinating movement. I also want to mention, of course, tonight we are going to get deep now as well into the Tesla-Trump meeting and how it relates to all this, or shall I say, the Trump investigation of Tesla's information and exactly what they were looking for. And also I'm going to quote a close associate of De Palma named Adam Trombley, and he's going to talk about something very interesting that was coming up for Tesla right around the very weekend that he was killed. Well, he died, supposedly. According to Trombley, he was killed. And I'm going to show how what he has to say here is very viable, after all. So we'll get into all that. But before we do, what do you got?
Michael Skelton says, wait, did he mention about how the Sunburst Ranch abutted the Reagan Ranch?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we brought that out in the first episode and we started the show with it. It's very important because you have to understand that you can't just get that, because there's a whole security clearance factor when you have the governor of the state who's running for president. Here's a little thing that people don't know, but if you look at the 1968 presidential election, if you look at the primary vote total for the Republican side, guess who got the most votes? It was not Nixon, it was Reagan. But Reagan wasn't even running. So they were taking a look at those results at the primaries, thinking, well, they're not binding because at the convention, they're all going to go with Nixon anyway. But the Nixon people got nervous about it, and there was a movement at the convention to elect Reagan in 1968. So Nixon went to him and said, if they pass this to you, please throw it back to me. And he does. He throws it back to him. He's only been in office for 2 years. But, Reagan, he was fast-tracked. They knew he was somebody that they could rely on. And I don't think that they quite understood the idealism that was going on there in the Gipper's head, and how the whole thing around the UFO threat and all the rest of it plays in. When I was on the Alex Jones show, it wasn't Monday. It was a week ago Monday. And I mentioned to Alex this whole thing about the Gorbachev clip, and he's like, I know somewhere I've heard this, but I've never seen it. And we went through with his crew looking for it. I knew I had a copy of it, but they figured, hey, they'll just grab it from some source. They could not find it anywhere. We had to go back to my documentary and get the clip, and they did. We broadcast that whole clip live. And it's very important because the meeting with Gorbachev and George Shultz and Charlie Rose, pre-sex scandal Charlie Rose, with Kissinger in the audience, took place in 2013 at the New York Press Club. And Gorbachev goes into how Reagan approached him at Reykjavik and said, we have this UFO threat. Will you help us when they attack? And Gorbachev said, he was dead serious with the whole thing. And Gorbachev wanted to put across just how insistent he was about it. So when we play the clip, it's very interesting because a lot of people didn't know about this. And sometimes this happens when you're a researcher and you do the work, you just assume everybody, knows the same things that you have out there. But we did a high and low search, and literally the only place that we could find it in, and I hope people can find it, but was in one documentary that I put out. This is going back a few years too. And I had the clip, at the time it was perfectly available. And I've been noticing this a lot, which is a lot of things are disappearing online. So never quite trust the digital archive. Make sure the stuff's backed up.
Memory holing.
since I mentioned Reagan and Gorbachev there, I'm going to show something that maybe has not been on people's minds, which is all about Trump meeting with the top-ranking emergency preparedness COG people from the White House in 1987 as a financier, real estate guy who took an interest in this and some very unusual things. And I believe that the reason they took him into those meetings was because of his uncle, John Trump, who they had just posthumously given the Science Medal of Lifetime Achievement to. This meeting at Reykjavik was one of the most important pieces in history, and it was viewed at the time as a great disaster because nothing came out of it. But in fact, Reagan and Gorbachev said that they talked about the 0-point option, which is getting rid of all nuclear weapons. Well, that's pretty remarkable. If you can do that, you must have something else. So when we hear Trump talking now and saying we have this alternate, source of power and weaponry that no one would even imagine, that's a weird thing to put out there, but even stranger to try to think, what exactly is he talking about? Well, this is the X technology. This is the heart of the black budget programs that they've been working on. But when Reagan took Gorbachev aside and said, there's a UFO threat, and if they attack us, will you help us? Will it be the United States and Russia united against the UFOs? This is a very significant thing. Gorbachev put it on the record for a particular purpose, because guys at that level, politically and otherwise, don't just mention things in an offhand fashion. The other thing I think that's significant in relation to Gorbachev is that he gave a speech at the Texas School Book Depository, the 6th floor museum.
He did?
Well, that's where the assassination took place. Yeah. And that was in 2009.
Wow.
And what's particularly interesting is right afterwards, he met Jackie and JFK Jr. And I have photos of that, which I've shown before. So there were a lot of weird things going on there. Right before that, well, actually, it's about a decade before that took place, 1999. There's a very unusual auctioning of Evelyn Lincoln's items upon her death. And of course, Evelyn Lincoln was the secretary of JFK. And she always maintained that he was killed in a conspiracy. And she listed it, a lot of interesting, colorful figures, but certainly the Central Intelligence Agency was at the top of her list, along with the vice president. Now, this is an unusual auction. And there's been some intrigue about it. I can't get into it tonight because it's not really the episode for it. But in the middle of all that, Trump was hosting the auction at Trump Tower. And he takes the opportunity to sit in JFK's chair in that period. I thought that was very, very powerful imagery going on. And that brings us to this very unusual revelation about a 1987 meeting between higher-ups in the Reagan administration with then real estate mogul Trump. And I'm going to read now from an article from a writer for Slate magazine who just, he gives us some snapshot of how this took place and what was going on. And the article is called Trump's Nuclear Experience. And there he is pictured with his first wife, who is the mother of Ivanka Trump. And now Ivana, and this is the headline is by Ron Rosenbaum from Slate, and it's in 1987, Trump set out to solve the world's biggest problem. Okay, we're going back to 87 now. Remember, it's right around here that Trump gets that letter publicly after appearing on the Donahue Show from Richard Nixon saying, you should run for office, and she predicts you're going to win. And everyone assumes, oh, that's Pat Nixon predicting it. But of course, we know it's more likely that it was Jean Dixon peering in there as she worked not only for Nixon, but Ronald Reagan as well. In the background, of course, to all this is the very fascinating piece, of course, that President Trump's uncle was so deep in these programs that it was Vannevar Bush who was his protege. Vannevar Bush had Trump as a protege. So his mentor was Vannevar Bush, who controlled the UFO file. We can only imagine the level of detail. And I'll tell you, the more that I've looked into him, the more I find him working on secret missions during World War II. Well, that's not brought up very much, but he's sent over to Europe on quote unquote secret missions. So now I grabbed just select portions of this article that are really relevant. I'm going to read a little bit from it, and then we're going to see how that relates to what Trump just said. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 196. It's Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. We're going to bring it around by sort of globetrotting through these various events that happened in different centuries tonight. Before I go any further, what do you got?
Well, John Matthews says, considering the UAP threat narrative, wouldn't they want the Gorbachev clip out there supporting the hysteria?
No, because again, I think it shows and it encourages the highest level interaction. First of all, it's too big of a revelation for them to leave hanging around. And they whitewashed it dramatically. You know, we played it. When we played it on the Alex Jones show, that's the biggest audience for that clip probably ever. And I've had it in my documentary for years, but you cannot find that clip. And I think that it's been obfuscated for a lot of different reasons, but one of the crucial things there is that Henry Kissinger's in the audience, and he is really, really, if you look at him, he's so nervous that what's going to happen is Gorbachev is going to say, hey, you know, by the way, this all relates to the UFO file, and that was the first high-level meeting between superpowers on the UFO file since Kennedy and Khrushchev, and the whole thing was going to unravel right there. And this is the big thing I've pointed out before. When you have the leaders of Russia and the leaders of the United States getting together without the sort of blocking facade of the State Department, without the prying ears of the NSA, without CIA control and all the rest of it, you get real discussions, which means they might discuss the UFO file and make decisions related to it. And that is anathema to that deep state process. I also believe it's one of the reasons that they don't like Trump, which I think is pretty obvious between his first administration and them trying to keep him out of this one, including by means of assassination. Now, when you say that, it doesn't mean that Trump is some super genius who knows about the UFO file and, you know, he's a Wizard of Oz. What it means is that the people in that deep state side are used to having that advantage. And I think when they look at him and his Roy Cohn influences and his UFO file influences, that's why you have to peel them off the ceiling when they're dealing with him. They literally have tried everything from lawfare, assassination, and everything else to get rid of this guy, including drone intimidation. Add that one to the list. We'll never forget that after that drone situation happened, we started to see those motorcades with Trump while he was still president-elect, not yet president. This time, and you're starting to see those motorcades, and on top of the limos and stuff, they have the rocket launchers just in case they decide to launch those drones over. Well, that doesn't look like a normal situation. Obviously, some third party was stumbling around in the middle. Okay, so Rosenbaum goes into this. He's recalling his meeting with Reagan in 1987. Even then, he looked down at the grubby big shots who just wanted to make mega bucks off real estate. He had higher ambitions, although if you tuned into his tone a quarter century ago, there at least was some hesitation in putting himself forward as savior of the world. This guy is not a Trump fan, in case you didn't notice. That's what makes this article so very interesting. A trace of humility at the task, that's gone now. What you do find is a prescient Trumpian impatience with defensive intellectuals, exemplified in his contempt for then fashionable nuclear deterrent theories like Dense Pack, a plan to group our nuclear silos so close together that attacking missiles would destroy each other by means of fratricide. crashing into each other over the desolate Great Plains. He saw how dense it was. He knew about the dangerous reality of a hair-trigger nuclear posture. This is, again, 1987, remember. He said he had an uncle who was a nuclear scientist who made him aware of the all-too-easy proliferation of nuclear weapons. He's talking about Uncle John back in 87. We know he brings him up on the campaign trail. He brings him up as president. He brings him up all the time. And there's a reason for that. He had already read Strobe Talbot's Sagacious History of the START talks, which is strategic reduction for nuclear weapons. The name of the book was Deadly Gambits. Still impatience, combativeness, impulsiveness, not exactly what you're hoping for when it comes to the guy in charge of the nuclear trigger. The combo makes one uneasy. On the other hand, he seemed genuinely aware of just how much danger nukes put the world in and how futile efforts thus far had been to deal with the danger. He didn't sound eager to pull the trigger, which I guess was good. There had to be a deal, he said. Still, I used to laugh when I thought back on Trump and me at 21 in New York City talking about nukes. Well, I'm not laughing anymore. He talked about, in 87, going into nuclear silos, holding the launch keys, and the strange metaphysics of nuclear strategy. I discussed the end of the world with missile crewmen who could even bring it about. It's the kind of thing that stays on your mind. Eventually, I wrote a book about the nuclear question, and so on and so forth. And he said, people were not paying enough attention. Even if it took a madman like Trump, he was making them look at this. So that was the context for the story I wrote, which Slate is reprinting below. The lunch arrangements were made by Manhattan Inc., a now gone but not forgotten magazine, founded by Jane Amsterdam and beloved by writers. My gig was to take the loudest, glitziest luminaries of the era out to lunch and capture them on a tape recorder, and to profile their self-importance, not just the rich and famous, but politicians like Ed Koch, Mario Cuomo, zeitgeist promoters like Robin Leach, $1 billion fame. Sometimes politics got me kicked out of lunch. Rereading my own Trump piece, I recall how surreal it was. I met Trump in his office at Trump Tower, an office that featured a golden mirrored ceiling. He was already an iconic New York character, but he had grander ambitions. Perhaps the grandest was saving the world. Before our lunch, he confided to me that he was talking to people in Washington. Even in the White House at the highest level, he was on the verge of breaking through. Even though he wanted to be viewed as something more of a glam real estate speculator, but he also was someone of substance politically. When I arrived at his office, he told me he was on the phone with Bob Dole, the senator, the Senate minority leader, the timing of which was probably prearranged. We walked over to the 21 Club, Trump's Cheers, where everybody knew his name and instantly started to clamor for his attention. And so there's more of this, which I could continue to read. But what happens basically is he tells them, I'm meeting with their emergency planning people, and we're going over these different options. I'm giving them options about how to handle the nuclear side of this and create an environment where there's no proliferation of nuclear weapons. And he lets out something in there that he has basically a tool that they could use to really disarm the whole nuclear side of it. So what we have there in that article, that little flashback from this guy, is Trump meeting with high-level Reagan era people in the White House, dealing with emergency preparedness, which is the COG network, and talking all about some sort of secret plan to denuclearize. It's a very important piece in this sense because it lets us know what was going on even at a very early stage with Trump on this. And so when we get him talking now about ending these wars and other things and talking about extra weaponry and things that we have, it sounds to me like through John Trump all the way back in 1987, he had the knowledge around this and he was sharing it with the Reagan people. But the Reagan presidency was surrounded by a gauntlet, really, of these deep state hawks, and including William Casey, CIA director, Bush as VP, and Rumsfeld and Cheney were working on the COG stuff, in the background with Oliver North and the Doomsday Network. So Reagan is kind of isolated back there, and he has handlers and people of this nature. But Trump is in the middle of all this, giving this information, and it may have put Trump on the radar in a very, very sinister way for these groups in the deep state, looking at him and saying, if this guy gets anywhere near the presidency, we're going to have some problems. But that's going to dovetail particularly with the SDI Star Wars Redux, which is called the Golden Dome, which is already getting a significant budget being put together by the Trump administration, which carries out what SDI was supposed to do, which is to be a gigantic shield from space so that no nuclear missiles can actually touch us. Well, the interesting thing is that people on the inside understood that the Golden Dome, if it is SDI too, that the whole Star Wars program was built so that we would have a defense grid, a defense against the UFO threat. Very interesting indeed. We're going to get into how that all plays out with the Paulson Tesla UFO file, going deep on Brother Sunburst tonight in this special X series episode 196. Before I go any further, you're up.
Down Jones Muller says, what is the super powerful weapon that Trump mentioned?
Wouldn't a lot of people like to know? Well, he's putting that out there. The Space Force is putting it out there. So the aggressive stance around things like tariffs is also like meet the new boss. Now, I'll tell you another weird thing. There are incredible parallels with the beginning of the Trump administration this time and the beginning of the Reagan administration, including the fact that they had issues with air traffic control very early on, including the fact that they're going in and saying, we're going to clean up and cut the government. And they're getting a lot of pushback on this front. And Reagan has his assassination attempt less than 2 months in office. And then Trump has his 2 months before he gets into win the election. So there's an awful lot of things that are seeming like a replay of history here with Trump and Reagan. And the fact that he's now saying, I'm going to do the Golden Dome, which, by the way, yes, I'll admit it is Star Wars too, but Reagan didn't have the ability at the time with the technology to do it the way that I'm going to do it. Well, this is very dramatic because, of course, Trump started the Space Force, and that was all about pulling the UFO file back under executive control. This is finishing the job if he can pull it off. But also, there's a lot of things involved with this that have to do with world security and, a lot of the whole thing about Elon Musk being so deep in this administration early on, although there's some pushback from that, obviously, now that maybe they're starting to see the light that it's not so good to have Elon out there as a front man because he is really, he's highly unpredictable and he's not particularly popular. So you can still have him as part of your administration. You can still utilize the talents from his staff and all the rest of it. But having him as a front man sucking up the oxygen of the Trump administration is not good because Trump is a little older and, now than he was the first time around. And so really making that impression and getting his message across, what he wants to do, you really need him to be the focus of things. And anything, I think if they want to do some spotlighting, they should be spotlighting Vance, who is the VP, who would be the likely heir to the Trump presidency. But it's weird there, too, because Trump has tried to raise the idea of running for a third term when he's 82. First of all, they have a constitutional amendment against that, one. And two, Trump has superhuman energy. There's no question about it. But I think once he hits 82, he's going to have to be aware of his age in relation to that. But he's going to be able to pass that on to somebody. And so having Musk build up this huge profile is not politically expedient as much as, the Doge thing has a lot of interesting benefits. What it should be, there should be like a Rand Paul character working with that, adding that dimension of legitimacy in the government. And then you should be highlighting somebody like Vance who may be taking your place, And I think with things that they're doing, I just want to say as an aside, because Vance is a dynamic choice as VP, but they're doing the wrong thing with him. They're sending him to countries and having him talk tough, and he's not a tough talker guy. He is really, he's a detail-oriented wonk when you come right down to it. And you want that. You want him to be the complement, the kind of, prep guy versus Trump's bluster thing. You don't want them both blustering, especially, this guy goes over and he starts to talk tough. That's not really his role. So that would be my thing. They can use him best as kind of the guy who goes over there and solves problems. If you have this thing with Greenland you want to work out, he's the nice guy who's going to try to get some kind of a deal.
Right. He seems so much more of a diplomat by nature. He's a very well-developed feminine yin nature. You can see that in early interviews.
I think his lawyer side, he's really good with details as well. And he's a very young guy. He's, he's just barely 40. So there's a lot of room to grow there. So he could have 4 years as vice president and maybe be ready. You might have a lot of competition when 2028 rolls around with people like DeSantis and other things. I mean, there's a lot of different forces in the party at this point. So it's going to get interesting, but Trump talking about this extra weaponry and the things that America has is shining a light on some of that secret tech, the breakaway X tech, which they're now rolling out, and they need a story to go with it. And guess what? The UFO story on the CIA side is exactly what they're primed to get, as a fake narrative around a threat there coming in. So I wanted to show this. I found this article from 1954, which shows John Trump with Professor Van de Graaf's incredible development, which is this machine that was built off of Tesla technology. And it's interesting when you think about the interface of John Trump's life, because of course, Vannevar Bush, the head of the UFO file, sending him in to review Tesla's papers, it makes him interact with this higher level of technology in the UFO file. Once he gets to this, working with Van de Graaf is building these generators based on Tesla principles. So Trump and Tesla are intertwined. And sometimes you have people make light of this and be like, it was just some one-off thing where, John Trump went in there. No, it's a gigantic interface of technology. One of the most secret points in the technological program of the United States was the RAD lab come out of MIT, which was run by Vannevar Bush, and Vannevar Bush's protege was John Trump. If he's running the UFO file, Trump is his man. So Uncle John, who Trump is talking about in 1987, there's a significant reason for bringing him up then. And then what does he do now? He talks about Uncle John all the time. There's so many clips of him talking about Uncle John. And my surmise on this has often been, that's a message saying, he was talking about this in the heart of, for example, the lawfare that was going on against him, the Alvin Bragg situation. He starts talking about John Trump. To me, he's saying, I've got the technology, I've got the know-how, and, you guys forget it. Now, the raid on Mar-a-Lago, I trace these things as all having something in common. And I'll show you how they all do fit together. So at the end of the 19th century, there's a lot of hardcore technology developed ahead of its time by John Worrell Keely and by Nikola Tesla, who we're more familiar with, I think, than Keely generally. But Keely demonstrates a flying machine for the Army that can go 500 miles an hour then. Okay, we had nothing even close. We didn't even have the phony Wright brothers launch, which we know is not the first plane launch. But so Keely, it's very interesting because I'm going to show you how Keely and his technology being shipped over to the Theosophical Society at the end of the 19th century so that Annie Besant can hide it in the vaults, as it were, because humanity's not ready for it. And Lord forbid World War I comes around and they start using the Keely etheric psychic technology. It's all over for humanity. So this thing gets hidden. I'm going to tie that in to the raid at Mar-a-Lago, which takes place in 2022. And that fabric over time is going to stick. And it's going to stick through the Melchisedec device, the Tesla work, and Star Wars, and this advanced technology piece, because it's all a huge arc that does connect unbelievably. But I'm going to show you how it's possible as we go deep here in episode X series 196, which is Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. Before we go any further, I'm going to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter. Now, that's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch, and you're going to want to know because we have some incredible things that are coming up for you that we've been shooting. And 2 different miniseries now are coming out, and that's all in the newsletter for you. Of course, incredible interviews coming up, X-Series episodes that'll blow your mind, and live events. It's all in there. Just go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that. And before I jet off into Keely in the late 19th century, I'm just going to say this about what's going on here and now with the upcoming UFO hearings, and how you can't get the truth from the people that are being called to these committees, like Elizondo, who's a counterintelligence agent, and Melon, who's running him, and Gallaudet, and all the rest of it. And Gallaudet, being fed false information from Melon and Elizondo. Those people invading this process and coming in and spinning the heads of Luna, who doesn't have a lot of experience, even though she's earnest about it, and Burchett, who also seems to take the counterintelligence CIA people at their word. When it gets to the UFO file, there's a real good reason for these people to be embedding themselves in there. And it's a big, big problem now. They supposedly are having this SCIF meeting, and they're doing this buildup around the UFO thing again. And in the middle of it, just as they kind of, their counterintelligence mission has been failing, in the middle of it, they have George Knapp and Corbell releasing new Tic Tac footage, and the Tic Tac was already debunked heavily. And that there is a separate technology that we've developed that is based off of this UFO technology is a fact. There's no question about it. And the UFO file is real, but the false CI disclosure is not. And what they're doing now is they're rolling these people out, and they're incorporating things from the real UFO file into their false narrative, including stuff that we present here on the X series. And I've pointed out the figures that are doing it. But they're coming out now, as I mentioned, with the Kennedy UFO thing on News Nation, and they're going to be using this Jesse Michaels guy, who's been a real plagiarist of this program. And there's no reason to do it, because all you have to do is cite the research. But they don't like to do that, because if they have to mention Dark Journalist, then they go back there in the back room and Chris Mellon spanks them. And he says, that wasn't the idea. Well, instead they've got him meeting in Masonic lodges with Lou Elizondo. And, just as they've been failing, I think you get somebody like Melon back there being like, push out Elizondo again with the Tic Tac. We need this thing to roll. And you can just picture him whining that at them. I'm going to read a couple of things that Malmgren said on the record here. Now, we've reported, I talked to Malmgren. We sent messages back and forth to each other, and he did work in the national security staff in the Kennedy White House, and he did confirm publicly on Twitter that JFK and Richard Bissell were, they were being briefed on the UFO side, and that Bissell briefed him on otherworldly craft. So he put this already on the record. And so that News Nation doing this thing like, oh, we have this incredible breakthrough and all this stuff, and then attaching people that are associated with Lou and Melon into it is a way to try to obfuscate and co-opt what, so people think that they're getting it to. It's going to be very important that this audience understands that in advance, because, they're going to do the whole Cold Heart, Corbell sideshow thing. And of course, the crux of it, you want the information to get out that JFK was assassinated over the UFO file, but you don't want the CIA running that narrative. And that's what they're doing with these people. But here's a couple of things that Malmgren put on the record, and then we're going to jump right back to Keely as we go here. How are you doing out there?
Great.
Okay, here we go. Malmgren said this on the record. After the Bay of Pigs failure, JFK and Bobby decided to blame the CIA. Dulles was suspended for review, and Deputy Director Bissell was asked to resign. Polite version of fired. His departure had to be handled delicately as he was head of all special ops. We have to remember the role that Bissell played. He was the mayor of Area 51. The person who picked up that mantle in the early 2000s was Chris Mellon. So you're dealing with Bissell too, with Chris Mellon. And so he's not like I'm a whistleblower and that government has to give us the facts. He's running the program to obfuscate the UFO truth from the public. So it's very interesting.
How do we know that Chris is in charge?
Through my own investigations, of course. I've laid that out very clearly. But no, Melon, forget it. Melon, we know that he was in charge of Area 51. That's already a factual record. And that he was referred to as the mayor of Area 51 the same way that Bissell was. Okay. In fact, in 2017, Melon came out before the article in the New York Times and all that and said, I'm familiar with all the secret programs from the government. There's no UFO program that's hidden from the public. Forget it. Then he changed. He was introduced into this thing about how they were going to do the op differently. And that's where the TTSA and all that stuff came out. But Melon, in my conversation with Grush, now Melon directed him not to talk to me. This is very significant because you have to sort of understand how what's going on in the background is that these whistleblowers are trying to come out and talk, and they're saying my life is in danger, from revealing these UFO facts, and I'm going to go before this committee, and I need support and all the rest of it. So when they reach out to people independently, if they have somebody overseeing them, and remember, we have Grush out of Pittsburgh and the whole Melon thing out of Pittsburgh, and I got information, you could probably guess from who, that Chris Mellon was grooming Grush at these Melon get-together meetings that they hold over there in Pittsburgh. So, no, this is a very deep, deep problem that they have in that UFO field, which is Melon is controlling the whistleblowers. It's a very dangerous situation. So we have to remember the position that they're in. So when they're invading the panels that are investigating this stuff, that means all the information about people who are genuinely whistleblowing come under this umbrella of the same counterintelligence agents that are trying to get that back to the X-Protect group and CIA. So that's not the way to do it. And again, I've pointed this out before, that as much as I talk about the lead people and that whole thing like Melon and Elizondo, you have to bring them up and bring their deeds to light in terms of what they're doing. And there's nothing personal involved in that. There can't be, but investigative journalism is definitely adversarial journalism, make no mistake. So in order to shake out what that program is, and in my opinion, they're building a UFO threat to order in emergency powers, create a UFO defense office worth billions, and set up, a separate constitutional structure. That's how deep their program runs. But for them, they're just going to work, I mean, Elizondo, he's showing up for work. He's punching the clock. Okay, Lou, here are your instructions. You have to go out and claim that you're a whistleblower, and that you led this program, and that the government needs to give up the truth about UFOs, even though you work for us. And he can't deny that he works. All he had to do is spend when I've invited them on this program for a gentleman's debate, all they had to do is spend 1 minute on this program, and I would ask them the question, do you still work for the government? And they would say, yes, I do still work for the government. Well, you're in counterintelligence, right? That's your job for the government. So if the government instructs you to lie about something relating to the UFO file, you're just going to work, right? So it becomes a very sticky conversation. So those people can never appear on this show because they'll get real questions. And that really makes the difference there. So back to Malmgren, though. See, Malmgren wanted to bring the truth out, and Malmgren's position supports everything we've put out about JFK and the UFO file, because it shows how active that was, which is the same thing that Douglas Caddy's work does. So when Douglas Caddy saying that Hunt told me in 1975 privately, before he went to prison, because I was his Watergate lawyer, that JFK was assassinated over the UFO file by this group inside the Central Intelligence Agency, it shows that Kennedy was about to make these moves to share that technology with the Russians. This is the nature of the problem. That's why he's a national security threat to those people. And so this is their excuse for getting rid of their arch enemy. But I will say this, that it's very important that we take Malmgren's testimony on its own, without the filter of News Nation, without the filter of the Melon, Lou people that are going to be running the thing. And, it's just an interesting fact of history that, oddly enough, before Malmgren came out, because he didn't say anything about any of this stuff, I had done a piece on Pippa Malmgren, who's his daughter, who was part of these kind of conservative think tanks and things. And it's very interesting. And I read from her revelations there last week about her dad and all that. And I've had communication with her. I've invited her on this program, the same thing. But I think that the same Chris Mellon block is going on there, you see. So that she can't. Grush can't. These people can't. Because if they do that, they'll offend Mellon. And Mellon runs the entire ship. So this is the thing, that if you're going to get to the edge of the UFO truth, if you're going to strike at the heart of it, you have to get to the Mellon control of the whistleblowers and the people around the whole thing. And every time you see these committees come out, or the documentaries come out, the Day of Disclosure or whatever it is, Age of Disclosure, it's always Mellon in the heart of it. He's in the middle of executive producing these things. He's the bank, he's the connection. And so he's the one with the agenda that they've put out there. So it has to be spotlighted. And as I said, he's working, Lou's working. These people are working. The only thing that we're trying to do is find out who their employers are. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Okay, X Series 196. I'll read one more quote from Malmgren. We'll get back to Brother Sunburst.
Okay.
How are you doing out there? Okay. So I will say this, that Malmgren wanted to get these things on the record, but he also told me that he wasn't sure how far he should go, one, and that he was wondering if that UAP thing that was going on last fall was going to open up some discussions, or, so he was hoping it would happen without him. And he also said, look, I was not directly involved in that UFO program, but I was briefed on it, and I saw particular incidents where Kennedy had to be called into action and go to Los Alamos after we shot one down, for example. And the one that they're going to highlight on News Nation is Blue Gill. That's the thing that's coming out. Well, there you go with, Blue is right in the heart of this. I've pointed out before that Blue is the name of the program. That's the secret UFO surveillance program. And when we brought that out in the documentary, which was called Blue, in 2023, the government came out in March of 2024 and admitted it. They said, because obviously this got out and they needed some response. And that's when different counterintelligence people started coming to me and saying, how did you get the name? So you understand that through the research, you can get to the bottom of the thing. And actually, you don't need the government to give you the answers on the UFO file. That's the big mistake that all those groups make, whether it's, UFO Twitter or Reddit or what, or all of these, Knapp, Dolan type figures in the UFO field. They're going through the government, through the counterintelligence people. That's why everybody's hanging around and they're squeezing this disclosure thing, and they're not getting anything. What have they actually brought forward? Absolutely nothing. So Malmgren says, 60 years ago, I was provided highest level classifications to lead DoD work on nuclear weapons and anti-missile defense. Informally, I was briefed on other world technologies, in quotes, by CIA's Richard Bissell, who'd been in charge of Skunk Works, Area 51, Los Alamos, but sworn to secrecy. So Malmgren put it on the record. He put it out there, and there's no getting around that. There's more that he said, but from all indications, the stuff that they're going to roll out of him, and I'm glad that they have it, unfortunately, the process is being hijacked by these other people, but I'm glad that they have him on the record, because here he was talking on the record, and of course, he passed away. So this is very important to understand what his testimony, that it's already out there, and that News Nation doesn't own it, and Melon and his control freak antics don't own it. It's already one thing I could tell from Malmgren. He wanted the story. He didn't want to give away too much, but he wanted to give enough of an indication to move the culture forward on the whole thing. So I give him credit for that, and it's unfortunate that he passed away before we got a chance to do an interview. I'm sure that would have been something, because he was there. He was in the White House. All right. I mentioned John Worrell Keely, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. Mr. Keely. Let me tell you something about Mr. Keely. Keely is a mysterious inventor, and there's going to be a discussion here in a moment about the mystery of the two Claras. One Clara Bloomfield Moore, is the one who funds him and Tesla simultaneously, and then sets herself up as one of the major members of the Theosophical Society, goes over to England as soon as Keely's technology is sent over there after his death, his strange death in the middle of all this. What happens is Keely develops this motor and demonstrates a number of unusual properties involved with it, including the fact, as I mentioned, that he supposedly demonstrated for the Army a flying machine that could go 500 miles an hour. Now, one of the reasons we should take Keely so seriously is that in the work of Rudolf Steiner and in The Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky, they spend deep, deep time on Keely and the significance of his technology for all the world. But they describe it as kind of an intuitive technology, that is something that is driven by the psychic mind of the individual, and that when Keely was around the technology, he could activate it and all the rest of it. Now, he had investors and he had other people, and as I mentioned, Clara Bloomfield Moore, whose son would write the most incredible book about Florida expeditions and find all that incredible two-eye stone stuff that we feature so prominently in the CRAZE and the HOTZONE documentary. Now, what happens is he's under intense pressure because these different companies are trying to get him to give up his technology. So he has a partner, and they're putting pressure on the partner, and they're saying, you have these investors, we'll say it's a fraud, and we'll put you both in jail. And in the middle of all that, Keely has a heart attack. Well, the partner is very smart, and he realizes the technology in the offices, even though these guys were in Philadelphia, all the tech and all the demonstrations took place right here in Boston. So he goes immediately upon hearing that Keely has died, and he ships all of it over to Annie Besant at the Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society decides, as I mentioned, to hide it because, the people that are after it are basically those who are pursuing a war agenda, and they will get that war agenda in just a few years with World War I. And I think what they devised and figured out at that point was, if there's a war and it's fought with the Keely technology, it's going to be an all-out bloodbath. So they hide it. But interestingly enough, there was a magazine around 1883 that had this anniversary issue in 1983, and I found a copy of the magazine. And the reporter tells this whole story about how he goes in. It's a British newspaper, but this British newspaper guy comes over to America, and Keely is there giving this demonstration in in Philadelphia. And then after he does the demonstration, the police come and get him because he's creating this strange disturbance because he's flying a craft with his technology. And the writers, the artist that was with the writer, based on the whole impression of what this is their idea of the photograph of the period, of course, that's what they took a picture of. So you got Keely down there flying this thing that basically looks like all the UFOs we're going to see in just a few years. Well, this was 1883. So somebody's holding now flying disc technology in 1883. And this picture up there, of course, is Keely in jail after the fact. So Keely had a very, very tough time, but incredible support from the deepest public mystery schools like anthroposophy and theosophy, who really spoke of how important his work was. So Clara assists in that whole process, Clara Bloomfield Moore. Interestingly enough, she writes her own deep books about Keely, what he was about, and then she writes also for theosophy. And she was the bank, as it were, to bring all that stuff to the front.
She looks like a bank.
Now, I will say this also, that her son, as I mentioned, his investigations, his archaeological investigations, show a deep level of knowledge about the whole Florida aspect of the Atlantis story, even before the Casey readings are out. So something very deep going on there with Clara number 1. Are you ready for Clara number 2? Because that's going to get us to Brother Sunburst again. Clara number 2. She is very, very interesting. This is Clara Clemens. You recognize that last name? Well, Samuel Clemens was the real name of Mark Twain, and this is his daughter. And she ends up finding herself in the middle of supporting, being involved in the Casey readings, finding herself involved in supporting Yogananda. She's into Christian Science. I mean, this woman is absolutely dynamic. And she has her own very kind of tragic story with this concert pianist who misrepresented himself and ripped her off and all this kind of stuff. But the very interesting interface that I find there is Yogananda really bringing this Eastern mystery school information here. And he's the one who sponsors Brother Sunburst very early on. And Sunburst is a painter. He's a contractor guy. And he's a large man. He's like 6'4". And he has these, unusual experiences where they grab him in World War II, and they send him overseas. He sees a little bit of action, then they bring him back in a month because of a family death. And so, he's in a weird place after he comes back from this war, even though he's only been gone for a little over a month. And he ends up becoming a disciple of Yogananda, who sees these very incredible traits in him. And Yogananda says, what is it? What's going on? And he says, I keep sensing this spiritual master around me and all this stuff. And so he says, what do you want to call the master? And Sunburst says it's Melchisedec. I think it's Melchisedec. And Yogananda starts calling him Melchisedec. Now, a few years earlier, of course, the famous Trump-Tesla thing has taken place where the FBI and the deep state are looking for this device that can take flying objects down at a distance. Well, this Melchisedec that we have here, shows up in a very interesting strata, which is he's coming in with Yogananda. He's coming in with this whole thing. He's going to be part of the Van Tassel movement. He's going to marry Van Tassel's daughter, Glenda. And Van Tassel's...
Is it Glenda?
Glenda.
Interesting.
Yeah. Glenda Van Tassel. And they're going to, launch this whole incredible movement, this incredible wave through Van Tassel. And what happens is, in the middle of all this, something comes up about this Melchisedec device. Now, the device itself is described by John Trump in terms of what the FBI agents were telling him to look for among Tesla's papers. And what it is something that can take flying objects down at a distance. Now, remember, the FBI came up with the term UFO, unidentified flying objects. So the flying objects that they're talking about that they can take down are UFOs. So he has to go through all of these various things and then give a public statement 3 days later that, no, there's nothing about the death ray in there. But in fact, they've sent him to look for something totally different. Now, that device, the nickname for that device becomes Melchisedec. Here is Brother Sunburst calling himself Melchisedec. Now, the device is referred to as Melchisedec in 1957. But here we have this Melchisedec coming on the scene with Yogananda and all that around 1950, and then getting involved with Van Tassel and the whole space meme and the UFO visitors meme. Now, if you read this incredible book, which is Sunburst's history, and in his own terms about, Atlantis and how these aliens communicated with him and all these incredible things. It's quite an extraordinary book in any case, even if you don't believe the stories. But one of the things that he says he gets shown there is a device that is basically the perpetual motion machine. Now, this thing was raised by Tesla, and it is kind of the dream machine of every free energy person. And there's the whole, thing about 0 point and all the rest of it. And there are people who know that track scientifically down to the detail, and I love listening to them on the physicist side talk about this thing and the reality of it. The only problem is anyone who gets near it, who gets anywhere close to demonstrating it, tends to have a very short life. And we've seen a number of different cases where this was involved, or their work gets co-opted, and so on. I think that there's a long history there, just like the different people in the UFO field who've had that. The one that I want to really focus on tonight in the middle of all this is Bruce De Palma, who's the brother of the famous director Brian De Palma. Bruce De Palma is an MIT graduate, and he, after being at MIT, started to work for Polaroid right here in Boston. And his boss was somebody named Dr. Harold Egerton. And at a certain point, he finds out that Egerton had worked at these secret labs for the government. And he has a conversation sort of off the cuff about UFOs with Egerton. And Egerton explains that they're hiding these things. And then it becomes a very taboo subject, as if Egerton was like, oh, I shouldn't have told him anything. But I think this opens Bruce De Palma's eyes, and he starts to realize, oh, wait a minute. The UFO thing is real, and now I'm also getting into this whole thing about energy and its development. His eyes are being opened. So he's come out now. He's pretty dangerous because here he is, an MIT physicist, and here he is now armed with the knowledge of the UFO file from somebody who was inside. And he makes a couple of very interesting statements, and one of them, as I said, relates directly to our friend, the astronaut. But he has a few interesting things to tell us along the way, and then I'm going to get back into his history and how he spent a decade now, from 72 to 80, like 81, right around there, with Paulson Sunburst at the Sunburst farm working on this and creating demonstrable statistics from what they were achieving, and watching while he's doing it, Paulson absolutely unravel, become a drug addict, and all these other things, and he started off with some issues. There's no question about it. He does, going back to Sunburst for a moment, he does have this relationship, and he marries Van Tassel's daughter, and then they have a child, and then he sort of takes off, and Van Tassel won't have anything to do with him and all the rest of it. So he had this side anyway. And as I said, he was kind of almost like a beach bum in a lot of ways, which is why it's so incredible that he becomes, this incredible cult leader, millionaire guy living there in the mountains. But we'll get to that in a moment. There's a couple of things that are mentioned here from an associate of his, all about what really happened to Nikola Tesla, that I think really is something we should focus on here. The guy's name is Adam Trombley. Those of you familiar with Thrive, the documentary and the movement that was put out there for a while, had a very interesting focus on alternative and breakthrough energies. Well, this is Adam Trombley, and here's a little bit of what he had to say here. I hope the Tesla Society will prosper and move into a new age of manufacturing, implementation, and further development. I want what has happened so far to be totally obsolete in 10 years. There's absolutely no reason why not. That's what Nikola Tesla was scheduled to tell Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in 1943. In 1943, he had proposed to FDR that perhaps we should look carefully at the fact that we can get all the energy we need from any space we happen to be in. He didn't show up for his meeting with the president. He was found dead in his apartment. Natural causes is what they said. There's some suspicion that maybe his visionary paranoia of poisoning was not exactly paranoia, but premonition. I've never mentioned this before, but when I spoke at the 1981 conference at the University of Toronto, a detective, an older gentleman from New York with a heavy New York accent, approached me afterwards and said that he was a detective at the time when Tesla had been found dead. He said he was involved with the investigation. He said for national security reasons that nobody was to know that the coroner's report that had indicated he had been poisoned. Now, Tesla, he was pretty old. There's no question about it. And yet, it was probably very inconvenient to have him around for a number of reasons. Now, the coroner's report did say he had been poisoned. Now it turns out that the only mediums, to my knowledge, that actually cite that Tesla had been poisoned is the Yugoslavian film on Nikola Tesla called The Secret of Nikola Tesla. So everybody can rewatch the introduction because it says that right at the beginning. And they also say that perhaps he was killed by the Nazis. I do not really want to mention all this, but science cannot exist in an environment where science is not allowed to grow. And then, so that's Adam, an associate of Bruce De Palma, putting us on the record there that Tesla was poisoned from a couple of different sources. I want that to figure into this next phase of what we're going to talk about, and we'll get into it in a moment. What happened to Bruce De Palma? We'll get into this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, now deep into it. This is Dark Journalist X Series episode 196. It's Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. We're going to be taking your questions here very shortly and unraveling the UFO mystery, which shows why these hearings and the Luna panels and all this stuff are very important to get it right and get the real truth out and not have these grandstanders and false counterintelligence people running that stuff. The same with the JFK hearings, which, as I mentioned, didn't really amount to much. And it's so potent. You could bring out so much there, and you could crisscross it directly with the UFO file and blow the whole thing up in a real important way that would get to the heart of the truth. That's what they need to be doing there. So I mentioned that we're going to be taking your questions. We will. We're running a little late here now, but we'll take your questions in about 5 minutes, and I'll roll the rest of the stuff in as we do the questions. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
What do you got out there?
David Tremina says, interesting fact, Doc Edgerton, aka Papa Flash, inventor of the stroboscope, high-speed and underwater camera, spent significant time searching for Atlantis, primarily around Spain.
Well, doesn't that open some things up?
Also, Joseph Farrell says, as I recall, Brian De Palma thought his brother was murdered and tried to investigate it.
Yes. It's very interesting because I noticed that Brian De Palma's own career went down after his brother's death. And I don't know if that was related, but it's very interesting to see that drop-off take place. Certainly, the brother is in this very powerful position there. He directed, Body Double, Dressed to Kill, Blowout. Very careful Hitchcockian style direction was going on there. And he, is regarded as one of the classics, doing a lot of horror stuff too. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot there, I think, when we get into Brian and Bruce De Palma, because I think Bruce De Palma is a heady idealist. And if you listen to his interviews, you can hear that he understands what's going on, that the consolidation is going to get tighter and tighter. And he sees that kind of fascist future that we find ourselves rolling into if something isn't done. So he's ringing the bell there in the 1980s and 1990s. And, his development in the 60s and 70s, I think, give us a really good background for where he was going. And I think that he had solid demonstrations of the alternative energy. And I think that part of the story that I didn't get to about astronaut Edgar Mitchell warning him that he was going to be assassinated himself by the CIA, Mitchell told him that directly. And he said, let me take it off your hands. I'll buy it from you. You'll be financially set. And, I'll work with this team developing it over here, as if he had some kind of immunity. But it sounded dicey to De Palma, and you can see why. And he said no. But he also was shocked in his own mind. He started to realize, the CIA is embedded in all these different fields. Because the conversation that he had with him about that was 1982. So, he's starting to become conscious of all these different things. And so he really understands the amount of focus that's being put on the alternative energy side, and that the stakes are so high for the energy companies and the deep state and that whole structure, so that by the 1990s, he's warning about it outright. And he's a very, very articulate MIT physicist warning us on this. So I think that they had to remove him. And, they said, well, it was his liver that gave out, he was in New Zealand. He was a drinker after all. I don't know. The story of his death is unusual because he was really deeply involved in getting funding from India about the demonstration of these alternative energy machines. Before I get into the next stage, though, what else you got?
I'm just going to, David Termina again says, also, Bob Lazar claimed his UFO bona fides from working for Edgerton's company, EEG, landed the huge contract for transport to Area 51 and filming nuclear test detonations.
Oh, interesting. Well, we can see there's some interesting stuff right off the bat there with Lazar. I mentioned before, and I'm going to say this again, that if you are new and you haven't subscribed to our free newsletter yet, get over there at darkjournalist.com and make sure that you're signed up for that, because you're going to hear about the incredible miniseries episodes that we have coming up for you that we've been shooting all month. And these are really fascinating and go deep, and they're going to explode some major, major things here. So basically, we'll let you know about the episodes that are coming out and the incredible X-Series episodes, interviews, documentaries. The whole thing is there, along with live events. The whole year is mapped out right in that newsletter. Make sure you sign up and get that now. And I also want to say, in terms of the miniseries work, this is going to be major, and we're going to cut through a lot of the censorship going on in terms of the work we're putting out with the network that we're working with on this. So, a hint of things to come. As you can see there, we're going deep, and just you wait. Now, here's an interesting side thing for us to consider. And then I guess I'll do this. We'll go to your questions and we'll have to roll anything else in. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay. Anyone remember this guy? Of course, it's the different faces of Edgar Cayce, Sleeping Prophet, and his psychic work, which is still reverberating through so much of the work that we're doing, and the things that he came forward with, we're still understanding what Cayce was trying to tell us. Well, it's very interesting because in the 1930s, he gives specific readings on a perpetual energy machine and says it is possible. And he actually even shows that the guy who developed it did have a live demonstration of it where it worked. Now, the guy's name was Marion Stanzel, and all of his work disappeared, by the way. He was an inventor. And but I want to say something weird about Stanzel, and it's why we need to bring in the psychic aspect when you get around this. Stanzel had a near-death experience in World War I in France, and when he was recuperating in the hospital, he started having memories that he thought, is this a past life memory? And this person was showing him all these blueprints and about how to develop a free energy machine. So he was always troubled by this, and he comes to Cayce with it, and then he says, I want to do, these things with my invention and all the rest of it. Well, what are these experiences that I had that are kind of like in the inter-between? And Cayce says to him, well, now that you asked, no, that's not a past life of yours where you're showing yourself blueprints. It's a character named Governor DeWitt Clinton. Take a good look at Governor Clinton of New York. Governor Clinton, somehow in the cosmic interface of everything, shows up in the unconscious mind of our friend Marion Stanzel, the inventor, and he's showing him blueprints for how to create a free energy perpetual motion machine. Now, when I go into the history of DeWitt Clinton, I find out that he's the person who developed the Erie Canal. And he was he had all these incredible tendencies towards different inventions and things. Now, what's odd also is that he worked very closely with the Native Americans there in upstate New York and developing this thing. And of course it worked and he was able to do it. When I went a little bit further, I found out that his uncle was vice president. And then he had run for president himself. So a lot of very interesting things were going on there. But the obscure reference that this guy gets blown up in France, he's in a hospital, and somebody's coming to him, nudging him, saying, look at these blueprints for this free energy thing. Humanity's going to need it. And it's DeWitt Clinton.
Far out.
The story goes deep, but I want to suggest that there's something driving this process which goes beyond normal human reasoning, that there's some spiritual interface that the right people get their hands on this. And that's why I think you see, in the deep state scientific aspects, you have characters like Teller who kind of embody this Ahrimanic, separation of science from spiritual matters, versus, say, someone like Oppenheimer, who's quoting, the Upanishads during the atomic tests and things like that. There's this clash going on behind it all. And I remember these Cayce readings about Morton Blumenthal, who was this, high-end stockbroker who was getting all these readings from Cayce, and Cayce's making him all this money. And Cayce informs him that his father, who was deep in the stock market business, is working with a group of investors on the other side trying to support his son's efforts. So there's some spiritual interface there that we're not very clear on, but there's an impulse that carries over into other places. And so in this case, DeWitt Clinton is saying, You have to, create this for humanity. And Casey works with him. There are 20 readings of them developing this machine. Now, here's an odd little addendum to the whole thing. I've mentioned this before when it comes to the Casey readings. A lot of shenanigans have taken place with people grabbing the good ones. 1973, after Stanzel's death, a letter was sent to the ARE, that's the Casey Foundation in Virginia Beach, targeted by the CIA in the 60s because they wanted to know about the Hall of Records, okay? It's the archaeology wars on overdrive. A new team of researchers were seeking copies of the original designs for the perpetual motion machine from Stanzel's files. His daughter wrote that her father had worked on the motor until he died 10 years prior and added, as far as anyone knows, his papers disappeared. It does seem a terrible shame. As of 2012, according to an essay in the National ARE website, there were still individuals working on building the motor and searching for Stanzel's notes. But no, they disappeared just like the second round of Bimini Hall of Records readings disappeared, just like the Nikola Tesla reading disappeared, just like the Thomas Edison reading disappeared. So, there was a thing around Casey. There were groups that spotted him on a kind of astral level and knew this guy, we have to make sure that he doesn't let out too much. But what I think is interesting is this parallels Van Tassel, who, after all, developed the Integratron based on Tesla principles, according to him. And we know Van Tassel is the ultimate kind of 50s contactee. But he does this development, and it's quite fascinating because the Integratron is close to, if you look at it now, it's quite extraordinary. I will say that. But you'll see that this building that's developed there is close to its ultimate fruition. And he said it's going to reverse aging. It's going to do all this stuff. And all the, UFO people that I'm in contact with are giving me the inspiration to develop this thing. The Integratron, look, no matter what anyone thinks about Van Tassel's encounters, something very hardcore scientific was inspiring his development of this thing. And he finally gets it made, and he has it developed, and then he dies. And his daughter, the same daughter now, who was married to Sunburst, says, I went by his office the day after his death, and there were still government agents in there hauling all of his stuff out. And I asked them what right did they have to do it, and they said it was a national security matter. They took all of it. So they took Stanzel's stuff, they took Tesla's stuff, they took this guy's stuff. There's a heavy-duty program in relation to this that we all need to get on the same page about, which is related to this advanced technology, and it's involved with the UFO file. And all of these characters that we're involved with here, whether it's Van Tassel, Casey, or even De Palma, they all have a heavy, heavy psychic component to them. So we have to understand the pattern and read it, and also see what kind of control is being held over that technology. I've got more here, but with that, Miss Olivia, I'm going to turn it over to you and your questions.
I wanted to throw this out. Corky Goss says, I painted Clinton on the Erie Canal life size. My aunt is his direct relative, Crazy.
Wow. Well, apparently, how dynamic do you have to be on the other side, on the astral plane or whatever, and come to this, I guess, idealist soldier who's been blown up and show him a blueprint for a perpetual motion machine. Now, Lake Erie apparently is an incredible, the Erie Canal and all that is a remarkable technological achievement. So this is there was a guy who was studying the Casey files. His name was Harold J. Riley, and he developed a whole medical. He's a hardcore doctor in New York, and Casey, sitting there in trance in Virginia Beach, is sending these people to this guy that they've never met. He said, well, this guy, Harold J. Riley, can take care of it. he has a good program. He has chiropractic, massage, and all of these different types of things, the violet ray machine and all this stuff. And the guy assumes, he's like, oh, this must be a doctor, that's sending me all these referrals. I don't even know this guy. And then he's going through the readings and he said, who is this? Like, this is the most erudite medical information I can possibly imagine. This is what happens when you get deep into that Casey work. There's such a stream there, which I think separates him from so many people who have contributed in different ways with psychic information and things. Something about where Casey's drawing from, he's able to get immense detail. And I think that really makes a difference. Yes, what do you got there?
There are so many different ways we could go. I've got things all over the place. Conrad says Doc Brown's wife in Back to the Future 2 and 3 is named Clara.
Oh, yeah.
And Tim Houston says Keely may have been an unconscious medium. It seems only he could make his devices work, but work they did.
Yes. And Rudolf Steiner would agree with you. He said they were activated by the etheric energy from the individual. So the way that it worked was that Keely could train them to unleash their etheric energy, then they could use the device to do anything that they wanted. And this was kind of the danger in the technology. However, it was so advanced, and the demonstrations are on record. I think it's interesting, though, with Theosophy and them hiding it, because, instead of hiding it to prevent the culture from moving forward, they're kind of vouchsafing it. They're putting it aside and for our future. They're putting it in almost time capsule form, and they're making a determination right there that if the warlike corporate situation of the turn of the century gets their hands on this, if JP Morgan gets his hands on this, forget it. The minute he gets his hands on the Tesla technology, he thinks, oh, this is going to be great, until he realizes, oh, wait, I can't meter, wireless energy. What is this guy doing? Not only do I not want him to succeed, like, remove him from all the other echelons of technology. Don't let anybody hire this guy. So that, he goes to this incredible downturn. And you hear so many of those stories of him sitting on a bench in New York City, feeding the pigeons and all this stuff. They knew how to blackball him. And he tried on a number of different occasions, including writing to, the leaders of England and the leaders of Russia and stuff, saying, I can help you develop this stuff against the Nazis so the world doesn't fall victim to this incredible movement and fascism. So he tried in his own way to keep himself out there and doing things, but he was incredibly blackballed. And it is insane to think of this guy who transformed the entire world with alternating current. What could we, what kind of a place could we be in as a culture with his full inventions being supported? I think it would have been a very different situation. Since you mentioned Clara, that is Clara Clemens, Mark Twain's daughter, who wrote the definitive biography of her father. But she had a very different path in life, which was to support Yogananda and to support be involved with the Casey work, Theosophy, and she's just a remarkable person. But her interface, remember that Twain was best friends with Tesla, and then you have her interfacing and working with Yogananda, and Yogananda's right-hand man is Sunburst. So then you have her with Sunburst, supporting Sunburst and Yogananda when Sunburst is young. So, there's a lot there because she knows a great deal about Tesla from Twain. So when you get, from her dad, so when you get into this is why we're globetrotting across these different lines in time. And it's quite fascinating because really it works like this. It works from Keely and Tesla, and then you have Twain and Tesla, and then you have, Theosophy and Clara Bloomfield funding Tesla and Keely, and then you have Casey's work coming up, and you have Clara Clemens involved with the Casey work, with the Yogananda, and then Sunburst comes in as a young guy into Yogananda's world, and then he goes into Van Tassel's space alien contactee movement, marries Van Tassel's daughter, and then has this incredible organic farm where he's making millions of dollars. And he is most likely hiding the Melchisedec device on the Sunburst Ranch and developing with this famous director's brother an incredible Enforce machine. And by the way, that's a shot there of him developing the machine for Sunburst in 1978. So he was there for a good while, and they demonstrated it for independent experts. So here's a question for you. Sunburst eventually becomes this millionaire drug addict and turns the Sunburst farm into an armed camp. So you can imagine, why do you think this guy took such a dramatic turn? And why did he come into so much money and all the rest of it? After all, he's the one who's with Yogananda. He writes all these books about Atlantis and all the rest of it. What happened to this guy? I think hanging on to something that valuable made him a target for a number of different groups. And I think Sunburst becomes a real question mark to history, especially with all the important people around him. And his ranch is right next to President Reagan, President Star Wars. Sunburst, there's a lot of secrets coming out about Sunburst, and I think it's going to open up a lot of pages. Yes.
Joseph Tuga says Sunburst sounds like a frontman for someone else involved with the tech.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And yet what's interesting is if you read his very interesting Return of the Ancients book, there's this whole thing about how the aliens are communicating with him about technology and how he recognizes the machine that De Palma shows him directly from his interactions with the contacts that he has with these aliens. Now that's pretty interesting, regardless of, how we feel about his various contacts and things like that. I had a picture of that machine, but I wanted to read this quote before we get into the next question. Here we go. This is just a kind of a synopsis about Sunburst and De Palma. So during the 1970s, the largest New Age community in the U.S. was located in Santa Barbara, the Sunburst community founded by Norman Paulson, who previously was a close disciple of Paramahamsa Yogananda, but whose philosophical perspective was deeply influenced by his purported encounters with UFOs, including direct interactions, which he reported in the Sunburst book. Based on his experience, Paulson is convinced that his encounters were with beings responsible for ancient and future civilizations on Earth whose spacecraft also have the capability of time travel. Now, it's weird because one of the guys who was in SRI, and was kind of a flamboyant scientist, and and he could be kind of obnoxious and things. He's still alive, but he claims that he got a call at the age of 13 years old, and the call was from a time traveler on a ship on one of these UFOs who's calling him in like 1950 or something like that, and saying, I'm calling you for the future. We're here looking back on the past and all this stuff. And he sticks to that story. But this is, a very respected physicist and stuff. So there's something interesting in there that a lot of these people come back to this conclusion that there's time travel involved with this. So I think we should keep that there as a little kind of piece in the back. Now, Bruce De Palma, I'll just say this. He writes to the Space Energy Association in Florida. And he said, it's an open letter you may publish in your space energy journal. Yes, I have been threatened for my life. The first threat came from Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut who told me the government had said there was never any doubt that the N machine was the free energy machine they were looking for. That's the one that he developed on the Sunburst Ranch. And if I tried anything on my own in California, I would have my head blown off. And the CIA warned me via Mitchell that I should not leave the country because I would be kidnapped. This was back in 1980 when these efforts frightened me out of going to Hanover, Germany for Dr. Nieper's first gravity field energy conference, which is where P. Tiwari brought his N machine from India and got the prize for the most clearly observable free energy phenomena to date. And this guy will get warned off also. This Tiwari guy will eventually get warned off of our friend De Palma. In later years, I had my inventions confiscated by various groups, the first being the Sunburst community. Brother Sunburst grabbed his machine, which helped me build the N machine you wrote about in your last issue. When their leader, Norman Paulson, got dollar signs in his eyes and decided to see what he could do with it without me. Later on, other groups tried to manipulate me and control me in the sense that they would get everything out of me technically without any assurances that I would be paid for any more than 1 year's work. In fact, Edgar Mitchell's contract with me was a deal he was trying to set up where he was going to have to raise $150 to $300 million and start a company which would be the size of General Motors in 3 to 5 years. And from then on, who knows? Out of this, I'd maybe get a 1-year employment contract and $30,000, the possibility of maybe owning 1 or 2% of the operation, something I turned down because of my lawyer's advice. Mitchell blew up at me. This is the weird thing again about Mitchell and the CIA warnings and other things. So there's something very strange going on there. There's more in that letter, but I think we get a glimpse there of what happened in terms of Sunburst. In a way, maybe Sunburst deteriorated on his own, but Brother Sunburst may have been manipulated, and they wanted to derail this project. They were trying to find where the Melchisedec device was. This guy was doing $30,000 a month in cocaine and other drugs. So,
back then.
Yeah. So he had DEA cases against him. He had FBI cases against him. He was anybody's game. And he didn't, he got prosecuted for different things, but he didn't really go down and spend hard time. He just kind of slowly deteriorated and the cult shrank. And, Wild Oats basically picked up all the organic stores that they had. And that was the end of that. But I do find it interesting because there were so many things around Sunburst, from Yogananda to Van Tassel to De Palma to the Melchisedec device, that there's some factor moving around in there. It's not visible on the surface. Yes.
Happy Hermit 3D. Was Sunburst taken by the Melchisedec power like Gollum was taken in by the One Ring?
Yeah. If you read his book, you can see in the beginning that he's taught very deep yoga techniques from Yogananda. And Yogananda is incredible. I mean, how would you rank him among the masters? He's one of the
best.
Yes.
Way up there.
It's an incredible idealist, too. And he warns Sunburst at a certain point, stop hitting on everyone here. Mm-hmm. And it's weird now. When I reread that, I went back and looked at it and I was like, oh, wait a minute. He's training men in the meditation center. So is Sunburst, is he hitting on the men? And this is like 1950. So really frowned upon. So whatever it is that Sunburst is up to early on, he has kind of addictive type issues, but he's very aware of all these spiritual experiences which take him to Van Tassel. And it's interesting because, again, with Van Tassel, who is the 50s, major contactee, and whose daughter marries Sunburst, Van Tassel, he shows up with his friend. Sunburst shows up with his friend whose name is Daniel Boone. And instantly, when Van Tassel meets him, he gives him a big diatribe about his history and how his lineage actually goes back to Daniel Boone. And he lists the different names in his family. He knows everything about him. So this is the kind of weird, instant psychic aspect that Van Tassel has. So you can see a lot of the people set up in the contactee movement, whatever was going on, again, they seem to have very high psychic faculties naturally. Now, I was talking about Adamski earlier. A lot of people over the years made fun of Adamski. If you go into Adamski's history, it's quite interesting because not only was he a theosophical teacher, which again lends itself into that psychic realm, but he's very early on the UFO side, using telescopes and taking pictures of UFOs in the 40s. And what happens is very interesting. It's recorded in a book where the author is trying to take Adamski down. And this very often happens to me. When I read the skeptic's version, I find something in there. These people are trying to shred. They go and deeply looking for dirt on somebody. And just like in the Seymour Hersh book, The Dark Side of Camelot, where they're trying to really trash Kennedy based on all these CIA insiders feeding them info, the whole Judith Exner blueprints thing comes out of that. And he's trying to prove, hey, Kennedy's taking, he's giving payoffs to these mob guys. My question was, there are advanced aerial craft in the blueprints, according to Judith Exner, who's the human intermediary between JFK and Giancana. What's going on there? Because why on earth would Kennedy be paying mafia people for defense contractor blueprints of advanced aerospace craft? You see how this works. Sometimes there's these little things that happen in the books that are trying to take somebody down. Well, in this one, Colin Bennett is trying to, portray Adamski as really this guy who is a gadfly and the UFO thing and all that. But what happens is in here, he recounts something where the FBI starts tapping his phone. And if you go and find that file, as I did, you're going to find that they show up and the 6 of them interrogate him. They push him around. They say, we're going to send you back to Poland if you don't tell us what you told that guy on the phone. And Adamski's like, what was it? And they say, where is the UFO killer? Where's the Melchisedec device, the thing that can pull down UFOs at a distance? It's the same question the FBI people asked John Trump 10 years later. They want to know where it is. They don't know where it is. And on the phone call, it turns out he was talking about these scientists. And he said, yeah, I watched the demonstration. They actually pulled the UFO down at a distance using this device. So they shove him around, push and shove, and he gives them a false story. He's like, oh, there's these scientists in Chicago. I watched them do it and all the rest of it. And he doesn't turn in his fellows, but he makes it sound like he's turning them in. And the FBI continues to watch him. And it's very interesting because if you check out the history, Adamski worked very closely with Van Tassel. And so they ran conferences together and everything else, those big meetings, Giant Rock and all that. So Van Tassel's daughter is married to Sunburst. If our friend Adamski knew where the Melchisedec device was, that's where the plan for hiding it on a ranch could have come from. That's why the story gets deeper and deeper the more you go. Yes.
Robert Ayala, according to Bill Clendenin, George Adamski's Scout UFO was a Vimana Red Mercury propulsion craft. Did Nikola Tesla decipher the enigma of Vimana's technology or perhaps Atlantean? Who was behind this?
Well, that's a great question too, because the technology existed previously. We know that. And this is an important fact to bring forward in the middle of all this, which is, we come back to looking at flying saucers and everything starting in 1947, the UFO craze and everything else. But it's there throughout history, and not just as an ancient aliens kind of BS, look at this guy, it looks like a space helmet thing. No, there's real, genuinely good accounts around this. And yet it sounds like, if you get into the mystery school work, that's all Atlantean technology. They had the flying technology. They had craft, according to Casey, that could go through things. Never mind flying in space. It could go through. That's dematerialization. Well, that's pretty advanced. Apparently, even we aren't at that level yet, or are we? It's interesting, and I'll do another piece on this in a separate episode, but there's a crisscross here with all of this in the Philadelphia experiment, including personnel like T.T. Brown and others. And that whole story about Jessup and his notes being intercepted and his book coming out about the UFO file, Jessup is so fascinating, so interesting. And then this annotated version, which has all of these equations showing a breakaway technology, and then Jessup getting these messages saying, don't talk about anti-gravity. And then what's interesting is that annotated book is known as the Vero edition. The Office of Naval Intelligence publishes its own copy for its members to read this thing. So this has put Jessup hot on the map in the middle of all this. And Jessup is, he's a rising UFO investigator. He's a professor of astronomy. This is a guy with a lot of clout for this subject, which is kind of fringy in the 1950s. And if you look into his history, archaeologist in the Yucatan, running coffee companies in South America. I mean, how many different lives did this guy have? But Jessup is fascinating. And then they get to this point really where he has this great knowledge about the UFO file. And now with the Philadelphia experiment part coming out in this Vero edition of the book, he's a perfect target for the Expertech group. The guy knows too much and he has access to a worldwide audience there. They get rid of him and he's on his way to meet his friend who's J. Manson Valentine. And on the way down there, he says, I have something very important to tell you. He ends up in a park and the carbon monoxide is run through and the windows are put up, so they say, oh, he committed suicide. He was so depressed. And Valentine, who knew him for years, said, that doesn't add up. That doesn't make any sense. He was so excited to come down here and tell me this thing. J. Manson Valentine, a decade later, will be the guy who finds the Bimini Road that Casey said would be off the coast of Florida. You'll find it in 68 and 69. They found it in 1968, just like Casey predicted. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Deep tonight on X Series 196, Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. We're taking your questions. We'll take a few more.
Okay, these are a few from David Tormita. One, the Integratron was made out of the materials Howard Hughes used for the Spruce Goose, who Van Tassel worked with previously.
Yes.
DJ, the N machine is known to be a homopolar electrostatic device, a type of device that Tesla wrote extensively about, especially in relation to the Van de Graaff technology John Trump was using. And DJ, whom do you suspect was running this Melchisedec operation, the CIA or a breakaway group faction?
Well, think about it. Think about what you have here, really. You've got John Trump and Vannevar Bush. They're going for information in Tesla's file. That's one level of this. They're instructed to find this device among Tesla's souvenirs. And it's very interesting and important that in the notes that come out later, John Trump says, well, it's interesting. Basically, they said I was going to have these 48 different boxes to go through, but there were only 40. So 8 of the boxes went somewhere else. And also what he thought he was walking into in the situation of getting Tesla's papers, the people who were there and around the scene of Tesla's deathbed and all the rest of it, they were all people who worked with OSS. He didn't know that. He's like, the hotel manager was an OSS agent, he found out later. So there's something instantly strange going on there. But if you roll that into where the device went, you get a real hint in that Adamski phone call being tapped by the FBI the minute he says, yeah, I've seen a demonstration of this thing. These scientists have it, and it takes down UFOs at a distance. This is exactly what Tesla, what the FBI agents were looking for among Tesla's work. And if you go further, you find in 1973, Curtis LeMay, in retirement in Arizona, finds a scientist who's familiar with Wilhelm Reich's material. And Wilhelm Reich had this whole thing about these devices you see it in clouds that can take down UFOs. The orgone piece. Very strange. But Curtis LeMay says to him, look, I need to find this thing. I don't have this device. We need to make one. How do you make it using the Reich material? And the guy stays on his ranch in Arizona for 3 months trying to recreate the Melchisedec device. Deal with that. We were obviously dealing with a major piece there. And once you get to De Palma and Paulson being right next door to Reagan doing this stuff, I think you're looking at a real political, technological intrigue. And in terms of who's moving the device, well, certainly it's the X-Protect group that's searching for the device, and somebody else has it. They apparently don't have their hands on it, which is why in 1973, they're trying to recreate it. They don't have it in 43, we know, because they're sending in Trump to find it. They don't have it in 53 because they're beating up George Dembski to get their hands on it. So something is strange. It's gone off the reservation. It's like a missing nuke. Yes.
Peter Nuss, they thought Tesla was nuts because he loved pigeons. Meanwhile, he was communicating using carrier pigeons, knowing his phones were being tapped.
Interesting. Yeah. There's so much with Tesla. We're going to take a whole episode to go into aspects around this with Tesla. I could only touch on the Tesla piece here tonight, but we're going to go deeper with that. And, there's a whole side there that connects us with mystery school technology, because it is, after all, the Faust line from Goethe that makes him understand what alternating current is. So once you're tuned in on that level, then you can see very clearly that Tesla is getting from this mystery influence of Goethe directly in his own subconscious to such a point that it hits him, he says, with the force of lightning. And the friend who's with him says that he took his umbrella and he carved the entire formula in the park where they were for alternating current, which we're all using right now. You see how this works. It's not all sort of intellectual gobbledygook. It is the inspiration of the idea and understanding really what the human is capable of as a kind of a weather vane, in a sense, or a tuning fork. But and then you have all the work that comes out of Tesla and how he's reaching so far beyond. I mean, we still haven't caught up with what he was trying to present to the culture. And, unfortunately, I think that the most advanced technology is in the hands of the worst possible people. But obviously there's some aspect here with the mystery schools and what they have and their knowledge base. And this is still something that the deep state wants to get their hands on. But the people in these schools, they have such a training. This is something that's really good to stop and sort of explain a little bit here, if I can, using Rudolf Steiner's work. He talked about how in Masonic lodges, they had lost all knowledge among the regular Masons. But the initiates around Masonry still understood and knew. So they could do things like hand movements or whatever it would happen to be that would impact the astral body of the student or the person who was, being primed to become a master Mason or whatever. And the person wouldn't even know what was going on. That's how a lot of these occult schools, esoteric schools work. And when you get to that level, you start to understand that there's a whole level of knowledge around these things that includes the impact that it has on your astral body, the impact that it has on your etheric body, and also your own psychic vision. All those things are included when you're talking about the technology. And we can really go into levels of the technology, and yet there's something else going on here as well. So when you're looking at that battle on the deep state side versus, people inside there I call it X protect versus X share. There's a small group in there that wants to bring these things out for the culture's sake. But the X protect groups are committed to that level of secrecy. Well, when you get around the schools, the whole idea of the mystery schools, it starts to open up a little bit because they understand the dangers that are involved there. Yes.
Nanette Christ, a metaphysician and top DuPont scientist friend, told me the KGB got to Tesla and his papers before the CIA and FBI. 10 years ago, more Tesla papers were found in his home country. Also, David Termina, and the FBI agent in charge of the Tesla papers ends up dead a few weeks later. Lester Lepore Sr., I don't know why, but I always heard that the device for taking down UFOs was described as, quote, Excalibur, maybe two different devices? And DA says, is it the so-called Rod of God?
Oh, that's really interesting. I went to do a Rod of God episode, and they took it down before it got started. You might remember this. This took place 3 or 4 months ago. But I put together a whole thing about that, and I'll be doing it again soon. So I think the nature of the name around Melchisedec is very interesting. So if they call the device Excalibur, it's possible. But I don't know what the source is on that. But the way we can track it in this scenario is through the fact that everyone had to call Brother Sunburst Melchisedec because Yogananda told him, what is the name that you're getting from the spiritual God? And he said, Melchisedec, I'm Melchisedec. And he said, well, you're Melchisedec. And so everyone called him Melchisedec. It seems to me the only reason it's called the Melchisedec device is because somehow its flight or whatever is related to the fact that Sunburst got his hands on it, or that somebody hid it on his ranch. But whatever it is, he's involved somehow. Yes.
Nutter Butter. Daniel, have you heard anything about the Shiva Star Project, particularly the operational program called Marauder 1 and 2? This was a plasma-based energy DEW.
Oh, yeah. I think I did read something that sounds like that. If you have extra information on it, you can go ahead and send it to me at admin@darkjournalist.com. I'd love to read that. What else you got?
Okay, Lancelot Link. Vimana is mentioned in Sanskrit texts. They were also said to be able to travel into space and underwater. Germany was developing Hanabu craft pre-1945. How advanced are current black projects?
Yeah, well, think about it. I go to the John Warner story. And John, really, you have to give him credit for putting a lot of things out there. But one of the great things that he shared with us is that Paul Mellon, his grandfather, who's really, hardcore connected there, son of Andrew Mellon, and just unbelievable, this guy. But he said when the war was over, he went over there to Peenemünde, and he went into one of the mountains where they were concealing things, and he was standing on a saucer-shaped object that was a football field and a half wide. So that's something we never heard anything about coming out of Nazi Germany. There were always rumors of the Nazi saucer and all the rest of it, but obviously a lot came out of it. And again, that's a private conversation that took place between Paul Mellon and his grandson, John Warner. But you learn a lot through things like that, because it's not somebody out there manipulating history. It's just some private thing that's exchanged and somebody remembers it. So what does that tell us? If the Nazis had craft like that, which is extraordinary, kind of mothership size, that are saucer shaped, obviously they were imitating something or developing something, and we got our hands on it and we were imitating them or developing it. I mean, a lot of what takes place really there, whatever program that they had, we wanted the paperclip thing over to us because we really wanted to develop that for ourselves. And when you get into the Bell Project, see, I think it's funny because there's a couple of really good research books on Hans Kammler and all the rest of it. And then there's Joseph Farrell's work. And Farrell knows, we've done the episodes on the Bell. That's where that research goes. Unfortunately, when we have kind of, the stupid things like the Tic Tac and, all that stuff, the field that would be interested in this stuff goes off a cliff because they're being fed junk by counterintelligence people, where the real stuff, if you could really get into what the Bell's all about, have a group of physicists studying it and its relation to the UFO incident in Kecksburg and things of this nature. That's how you get somewhere really deep on the UFO side. What's going on, whether it's the Luna Committee or whether it's these UFO hearings or News Nation phony hype and all the rest of it, and feeding the podcast, pop click beast, that's not real information. And that's why I think there needs to be something that comes out, which is neither this paid independent media, nor is it this, the false corporate media. But I think there's a lot of co-opting going on. So if anyone is really deep, there's almost no place to go. I mean, you're going to get really potent work here and through some of the people that we feature in this work, but it becomes more and more of a played environment. You're being played. So you have to, maybe search a little deeper for the good stuff. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 196, going deep tonight with Brother Sunburst and the Tesla UFO file. And of course, I should say in the middle of all this that, though we're going into very, very deep territory, I always take the attitude of anything that I'm studying that I can do better, and so I'm always trying to deliver that level of whether or not it's, sensationalist or pop click worthy, that stuff. The pop click thing is there's a major push, and there's a lot of bots and there's a lot of nonsense around it. And I've identified some of the people already. I won't even go into it, but you know what I'm saying? You need a different structure, fundamentally, I think. That's what I think dark journalism is all about. Yes.
I wanted to make sure we had enough time to answer this.
Okay.
David Donaway, Michael Rupert made the observation that they, in quotes, certainly act like they believe in peak cheap oil. They sure fight a lot of wars to secure something a cheap energy source would make redundant.
Well, I agree. Although I will say this, that just because, remember, if certain types of energy get out to the public, then their reign of terror is over. And having the reign of terror and fighting over how the reign of terror elements work on the public surface side, that helps you to control the population. That's different than things that are under the surface that they haven't decided the time is right and they don't have the control of yet. I've mentioned this with Apotheum as well. If they don't know how to control it entirely, and that the whole Apotheum effect that's related to things like the X technology, that's why the X technology is in the UFO file, because when UFOs show up, the same types of things happen as what takes place during a demonstration of X technology. So the laws of physics get suspended. I still remember conversations And just looking back on the work of people like John Mack and others, or anyone who studied Bud Hopkins and all that, the incredible detail that they would go into in the abduction experiences for the abductee, they would have psychological impact, psychospiritual impact, and physical impacts that don't equate to the regular physics that we use in this world, you know? So if they could see relatives who passed away, or they could be abducted through walls, or they would have missing time where, you know, 8 hours disappear, those things aren't normal. And I think it's related too to something that John Keel picked up on. He has a wonderful kind of index of all these different apotheum style effects and that take place during a UFO encounter. And it's quite fascinating because, you know, over and over again, the power goes out, machines stop working, you know, there are green mists. Like, what is all that stuff? You know, it obviously represents a different type of physics invading this one, and kind of, you know, it's that whole idea of when matter and antimatter meet, like the reality ceases to exist and this other thing takes over. So the kind of universal rules of physics that we understand don't seem to operate when you get into situations of alien abduction. So that has to be where a lot of this goes, which is they can't control it, as it were. All right, we'll take 2 more questions and we're done, Miss Olivia.
2 more questions.
So make them good.
All right. Well, God, we've covered. Give me a minute. Do you have anything to read?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Actually, I've got more. This is going to be kind of a setup for an episode we have coming up, but it's very significant that, and I want to point it out now and kind of give a setup, because L. Ron Hubbard plays in here in an interesting fashion. And let's go to St. Louis, say around 1973. National Personnel Records Center fire of 1973 was a fire that occurred at the military personnel records in the St. Louis suburb of Overland, Missouri, July 12th, July 16th. The fire destroyed some 16 million to 18 million official U.S. military personnel records. That's a lot. The MPRC, custodian of U.S. military records, is part of the National Personnel Records Center, part of the National Archives. And they go through the whole background of the thing. So the fire destroys all these records of these different people associated with the Navy and the Marines. The exact cause of the fire was not fully determined. A custodian admitted that he had been smoking in a file room, but he said that he snubbed out his cigarette. And the case was presented to a grand jury, but the custodian was not arrested. Deliberate arson was actually ruled out as a cause almost immediately by investigators. As interviews with some of the personnel had been in the building just 20 minutes before the first fire alarm, reported nothing out of the ordinary. Okay. Owing to the total destruction of the 6th floor where the fire had occurred, a specific investigation into electrical systems was impossible. Affected records. 80% of the records the U.S. Army personnel discharged from November 1912 to January 1960. 75% lost to U.S. Air Force personnel records discharged January 1st, 1964. From 1947, September 25th, 1947 to January 1st, 1964. Now, this is just an oddity, but bear with me. With names alphabetically after James Hubbard. Now, what's interesting is right off the bat, you've got 1947 in there, which there's all the UFO activity, there's Roswell, there's everything else. You get rid of all that and all their records. But then the name that you stop at, that, you know, you have all the records up to James Hubbard. Well, who's the next guy? Well, L. Ron Hubbard would be right there. And when I checked his background, he's right in the same time zone. So he's still part of the Navy. So his records disappear in all of this. None of the records that were destroyed in the fire had duplicate copies made. So you had to reinvent the service records of all these different servicemen. And it goes on and on. But what I will say is, in looking at that, it's quite fascinating because that fire gets rid of all sorts of notes relating to the very high intensity UFO period from 1947 in military personnel. One, it would eliminate a number of follow-up things around, for example, the Philadelphia experiment. And oddly enough, it eliminates the records of L. Ron Hubbard. So I found a possible reason for this fire. And in an upcoming episode, we're going to go deeper into that. I just thought I would tease that out there while you're doing that. And now your questions.
I got to ask you this one. David Tremita wants to know, does Elvis or Ed Sullivan fit into tonight's episode?
I put some things out there about Ed Sullivan and Elvis, and I tweeted some stuff out about it. But I have a kind of a showbiz thing coming up. A very interesting walk down this Hollywood showbiz aisle. And if I mention anything about it, I'm sure it's going to get scooped up. So I dare not say a word, but it's coming. It's coming. Oh, yes, it is coming. I want to say that I do feel that the idealism embodied by Bruce De Palma in searching very logically with a very, very capable intellect for a solution to the world's problems around energy and suffering the slings and arrows that he did, including from people who should have been friendly, like Edgar Mitchell and stuff. This is a brave guy with a lot of idealism. So, we need more people like him. But what can we learn from what he left behind? And I know a lot of people in that free, energy, breakthrough energy field are aware of him, but I think that he gets left out of the conversation in a sense. And yet, I think he got very, very close indeed. And I also think there's a streak of ethical honesty right in the heart of what he's doing that we need more of when it comes to these types of things. And, we have to be very clear that the type of opposition from energy companies, from corporations, from groups that we don't know anything about, to centralize and really, strangle the inspiration out of the culture so that they can lead it where they want it to go, which is a kind of techno-slave society. There has to be, the conversation that we have here in the ideas room, it is the catalyst. This is it. And so these are the types of conversations that we need to bring out and get that public thinking about it. Not chasing after the latest political thing or going over a cliff, with the 2 minutes hate thing or whatever it is. That's not really going to get us anywhere. And if you think about it, if you go back, there are people that are worthy of this, don't get me wrong. But, I was thinking about it like people channeled a lot of negativity towards figures like Dick Cheney and things like that and all the terrible, corrupt things that they did. And we could hold them up as examples of what not to be. But in a way, they also operate, and there's a vacuum of kind of psychic space there. It's like a temptation for people to aim their creative energy in a negative fashion. So we have to be careful, too, of how we handle these things, that we can acknowledge them, that we can discern what they are without, getting enveloped by judgment and resentment and things of this nature, which is fed to us now from the corporate media side, and now it's fed to us on the independent media side. We need a different avenue in all this. And I think here, someone like Bruce De Palma was really, in working with this material for decades, trying to get us to a different place with it. Yes.
David Tremina again. Brian De Palma often worked with John Travolta, the other neighbor of Brother Sunburst Ranch in California.
Excellent point. Brian De Palma had him in Blowout, which is an interesting story of someone who hears an assassin that's not supposed to be there, basically. And that's a weird movie. Very strange. A couple of key shots here before we let you go for the evening. And it's great to have so many of you here with us tonight. And you can see, this is where the kind of heavy lifting happens in these stories where we trek across time to put together these important elements. The mystery schools, the deep state, the UFO file. How do these things correlate and add up to each other? If we get a handle on that, then that's worth 1 million phony Tic Tac videos. That combination, Trump, his uncle, and Tesla, we need to spend the time on it. It does open up. It does answer a lot if we can get the right handle on it. Here's a quote from Nikola Tesla. I thought it'd be kind of interesting to close on this. Quote, "It is not a dream. It's a simple feat of scientific electrical engineering. Only expensive, blind, faint-hearted, doubting world. Humanity is not yet sufficiently advanced to be willingly led by the discoverer's keen, searching sense. But who knows? Perhaps it's better in this present world of ours that a revolutionary idea or invention, instead of being helped and patted, be hampered and ill-treated by its adolescence, by want of means, by selfish interests, pedantry, stupidity, and ignorance. That it be attacked and stifled, that it pass through bitter trials and tribulations, through the strife of commercial existence. So do we get our light? So all that was great in the past was ridiculed, condemned, combated, suppressed, only to emerge all the more powerfully, all the more triumphantly from the struggle." Nikola Tesla at the end of his dream for Wardenclyffe. So it's a great statement on his part, and I think it gives us some idea of what's at stake here. Your last question, Miss Olivia, for tonight, please.
Okay, so YouTuber 427 says, is it possible that the ET contact with Eisenhower in the California desert was a CIA lie that they just retold Reagan, when the truth is UFOs are just Nazi Bell tech flown by Chimera? And George Ivankovich says Nazis said they had help. Connect the dots.
Oh, wow. It's an excellent question. No, I don't think it's just human technology. You see how the extremes of any of these positions don't help us. And yet understanding that the human side may be a large part of it, but maybe even something that we don't understand is quite human. So there are factors there. It's very interesting. I go back to this Stell group Keenanger guy who was very much like Brother Sunburst, started off with an idealism and then degenerated into a cult leader. But one of the things he said in a very interesting little pamphlet called Observations by Richard Keenanger, he gets asked these questions, these letters about UFOs, and he says, the mystery schools have been using that technology since at least 20,000 BC. And that a lot of the things that are seen coming and going are basically these mystery schools using their advanced technology. That's interesting to me. I think it was an interesting point of view to consider. And, it comes up sometimes in the Casey work, and there seems to be an opening there that there's different types of life that take place. For example, in the mystery school work of anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner, he says that Christ was crucified on Earth in a physical body. But he says that the Buddha was crucified on Mars in a Mars body.
What?
So you can see there are pieces here that we don't understand. Casey opens us up a little bit further and says there's planetary sojourns. So on Earth, you have a physical body, And then when you go through the other planets, they're like schoolrooms. You take on the physicality of the body that you need there. And you learn different things and then come back to Earth. And the whole thing about the eighth sphere and Ahriman controlling the eighth sphere is that it's supposed to interfere with that process and cut off the spiritual evolution of humanity so that humanity does not develop through the normal cycles and develop, in the cosmology of anthroposophy, New Jupiter, which is basically New Jerusalem in the Bible. So, when you consider it from that point of view, we're not that sure of our facts, and we're constantly materializing everything. And yet there are realms that aren't quite physical but have an impact. So, there's some clear cases, where people are abducted and other things happen where it's obviously some other group that's not one of us. So I couldn't say all of the sightings would be just us. No, there's clearly some other factor involved, and the nature of the factor is interesting. I go back to this, after John Mack tragically died in a car accident in the UK after giving a lecture, this woman who was close to him and was also a medium, he appeared before her. She had the psychic experience with him. And he said, the UFO thing is nothing like what we think it is. That's the impression that she got from him, direct message or whatever. And I think about that sometimes. And regardless of how many different ways that we come to some type of conclusion about this, it's never quite complete because, there's information missing. And you're talking about being involved in a realm. Now, I want to show you this picture because, again, it's Governor DeWitt Clinton, who, again, did the Erie Canal. And here he is demonstrating how it's going to work. This is the guy that comes later to Marion Stanzel in a vision and says, here's how you build a perpetual motion machine. This guy was obsessed with his inventions, and somehow, long after his death, he's showing up and finding this World War I soldier has been blown up and is in a hospital recuperating, and this DeWitt Clinton is coming to him and saying, here's your perpetual motion machine. Well, I'll give credit to Casey, or this guy, for finding Casey and then doing 20 readings on developing this thing. Obviously, it was good enough that the government came in and stole it. Think of it that way. And of course, I brought up Hubbard tonight. Don't worry, we got a lot coming up on Hubbard. And Hubbard, of course, plays into the UFO file. He plays into Crowley and that big Scientology, heavy duty Scientology influence. Miss Olivia, you got one more.
Laura wants to know, when are you going to address the question of directed energy weapons and 9/11?
Well, gee, we did a series on 9/11. It's interesting. I'm glad people are starting to talk about 9/11 again because it's completely unexplained. And some of the best work done on 9/11 is by Professor Peter Dale Scott, who showed the correlation of the continuity of government group operating during 9/11. Actually, that's the first time COG was activated during 9/11. So it's quite a moment for the COG, a continuity of government crowd. But Peter Dale Scott pointed out, of course, that the COG crowd has been involved in every major deep event in our history. It's not a state actor somewhere. This is a secret group deep in the government. And from the Kennedy assassination, the personnel always shows up in the heart of the matter. They're all COG personnel. And when he outlined the different people throughout history, and I went into their backgrounds, it's fascinating because they're all part of this emergency network, from John Dean, who took down the Nixon White House, to Winston Lawson, who's the Secret Service agent who's setting up the Kennedy setup, to Jack Crichton, who is finds the translator for Marina Oswald after the assassination, so that the translation of what she says works out just right for the Warren Commission. It's amazing. Oliver North, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Iran-Contra, 9/11, they're all there. The crash of 2008, there's COG personnel. The COVID operation, suddenly Nancy Pelosi starts saying, I'm getting briefings from COG. They changed their whole thing there. And I think they wanted to make COG palatable as a way to, say, well, Trump is removable because we can do this with him. One of the things we revealed tonight is that Trump is meeting in 1987 in the Reagan White House with emergency planners. Well, emergency planners in that era are the continuity of government people. And he may be sharing some of the things that he learned from John Trump in those meetings. So it's interesting, the setup on this. So in terms of directed energy weapons, absolutely. Look, I've always said that the work that Judy Wood did was fascinating, and that she was kind of run off, and then the big question was, is she still alive? And I couldn't get a real answer. Finally, a couple of people who you would think, would know, came forward and said, as far as I know, absolutely, but it's interesting to get that much pushback against finding out just if somebody's still alive or not. Obviously, the work she did was highly sensitive. And I think the Where Did the Towers Go examination is absolutely important information to bring forward. And with that, Miss Olivia, I think we're done with your super chatters. You got them.
All right. Let me get to the beginning. All right. Get a cult fan, Tally Ho, Dawn Neway, Eurythmia's Fun, JT, Brian Whitaker, Ray Story, Jay Parsons, Descat Brock, Quantum Paradox, The Bikini Truther, Terry Doherty, CB, Erica Swenson Elliott, Jessica Rodriguez, Debbie McAdoo, Mirror 13, St. John Penwell Chidester III, Amarillo Gunrunners, John Matthews, Conrad, Old Man Junkins, Two Beagle Eye, Really Weird Studio. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow. We really appreciate it. All your support, and to all our subscribers, thank you. We couldn't do what we do without you. Let me tell you, the things we have coming up for you, you're not going to believe. Your mind is going to be blown. The mini-series work is going to be one level, and just watch out because there's so many interesting things that are in there. I can't reveal them here yet, but make sure you're on that newsletter list. It's free, and be a part of the whole thing. And of course, if you are subscribers, you'll get access to all that first. I want to do a few shout outs here for everybody. And of course, if anyone out there had worked with Bruce De Palma and had information about him, that would be great to hear from you at admin@darkjournalist.com. I'm still learning on his background, and the more I learn, the more intrigued I am about everything that he put out there. Of course, here we go, Reagan and Gorby talking about UFOs at the ranch there. I forgot to show this picture, but I found this very interesting because this is Lincoln Labs, where right over, not too far from here, actually, this is where John Trump was working. And that antenna setup is from 1936.
Is that still there?
Whoa. Probably. I mean, Lincoln Labs is, sure, but
that'd be cool if that was
yeah,
still
check
there.
that out. Isn't that? Look at that. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, incredible. So there's more to come on our friend.
Is it in Lincoln?
It is. It's
well, that's easy enough.
Yeah, it's Concord and Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And of course, John Trump, of course, spent so much time there. So if we're going to get to the roots of some of his activity, it's what did the Lincoln Lab end up doing? But I'm sure there was a lot of UFO redevelopment work done in secret in all of those various facilities. And I think that in many ways, what we get is Area 51 and things like that. I don't think that they do it anywhere near Area 51 and places like that anymore. I think it's totally, the network is totally redesigned. So I'll do a couple of shout outs here. Let me see what we have out here. Scarlet Fire. Yes. MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Total funding fiscal year September 22, 1.147 billion. That sounds exactly right. Of course, that's what's publicly available. Yeah, I wonder if there's any black projects going on there. Could very well be. A cult fan, they don't even fix the roads here. Great one. Upcoming DJ show going to be spectacular. Absolutely. The Hacking Atlantis miniseries, the JFK and the UFO file, both of these things are coming out. We work with a great production team. Wait till you see these. You will not believe the material that's in there. They are mind blowers, let me tell you. We have some great specials coming up for the end of April and early May. Just mind blowers, and some great interviews too. We're putting those up right now. And thank you very much, Peter Rabbit, 33. Thank you for your support, and we really appreciate it. It makes all the difference to the work we do here. And what else have we got? William Aceto, epic stuff. Thank you, William. There's more on Sunburst coming, but I think that we now are making those real connections. And again, although I've talked with people who worked at the ranch at different times, if you have information at all relating to any of the technology things they may have been working on at the Sunburst farm, please let me know. Thank you, DJ. I love how you provide the sources and to show you're connected with the 40K view with all your research. Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Esther Taylor, phenomenal. It's great to have you out there, Esther. Joseph Tugas, lions never bow, DJ. That's you, bro. Thank you. Well, you guys, the inspiration really is right there in the ideas room. No question about it. Live events, yes, they're coming. They are coming. Thank you, DJ and Miss Olivia. Let's see. Cannabos. DJ is the GOAT. Thank you very much. And that is Old Man Junkins. Wow. Corey Anderson. CC. Thank you, Miss Olivia. Great show again. Bravo. Nicely done, Miss Olivia.
David Donaway has a last-minute question. That's a good question.
Yeah, sure.
Were Van de Graaff, John Trump, and co-setting the ground for HARP?
Oh, absolutely. Excellent point. Not only that, but they were also setting the ground with the particle colliders for the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. So when we look at those projects, the foundations of it certainly are John Trump. And what's interesting, they were talking about getting anywhere in the world with Space Force in an hour and how you could now draw the energy from space. And then you have John Trump working on drawing energy from space as far back as 1934. And then you also have Bruce De Palma saying the entire end machine is based on getting energy from space. So quite remarkable. The correlations there, indeed. Phenomenal, Esther. Thank you very much. Lindy T. Hope we live through the intelligence community insanity. Well, my thing with that is, not to be paranoid about it so much, but to understand it so that you don't fall for it. So, for example, when they roll things out, like the Tic Tac, and it's controlled by the same groups, like, hey, we got this leaked to us. And it's the same counterintelligence people, especially when it comes to the UFO file. I'm focusing it there. I mean, there's so many areas that are exploited, of course, from pharmaceutical research to news to politics, whatever it happens to be, geoengineering. But I think on the UFO file, we have a great chance to reframe the conversation. And it's very important to do it. And while those hearings are going on, even though they're manipulated, the JFK hearings or the UFO hearings, this is the time. This is the time to do it, because the focus and the headlines that come out of those things right now are all milquetoast, all the Jefferson Morley stuff. It's milquetoast. It's milquetoast disclosure on JFK, right? Like, oh, researcher claims now that maybe the CIA did it after all. That's not the headline we want coming out of there. What we want is the information shows that a group inside the intelligence community planned the death of the 35th president over the advanced technology. This is, these are the world shaking aspects that they can do, and they can do it. They have the power in that committee. They have subpoena power in that committee. Subpoena some witnesses. I can give you an incredible list, as you can imagine. But that's my free advice to the Luna committee, and I hope that Luna and Burchett know what they're doing. The JFK hearing, why DJ should use cannabis. Let me tell you, these days I'm straight as an arrow. DJ's Christ impulse requires his embracement of cannabis. What a show. Stay potent, friends. Thank you, Nevermore. Wow. Great crew out there. Fantastic questions from the Ideas Room. Amazing. And well done curating it all. I see a couple more out there. 33 Master Mason, Richard Fetz. Wow. Very interesting. Van de Graaff is an amazing band, the cult fan says. That's great. Let's see. Take care, fellow travelers. See you next time. Tim Houston. Thank you, Tim. What time is it in Australia, Tim? That's what we really want to know. I know Kate's out there. Wow, it's great to see so many of you. We will be back with you next week, and the powerhouse episodes of the miniseries are coming out later in the month. You guys are in for a treat. You're going to get spoiled, and we're going to need all the good, potent info out there with all the pop click junk. In a sea of pop click junk, we're going to need it. But all you guys will be there together in the Ideas Room. And it says end broadcast, but after all, it never really ends.
Never really ends?
Never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and Camelot can come again. Make no mistake. And we've got RFK out there. We've got all kinds of interesting people on the scene right now. Now is a great time for a greater transparency before we fall over the cliff with the intelligence community running the show. So this is the time, and we're on it now. So have a great night, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next week.
God bless everybody.